Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ever Show podcast. With us today, again, we have our guest of honor, Ananda Bosman. Welcome. Thank you for coming again.
Great
So,
to
Ananda,
with you guys.
thank you. In our first interview, you blew us away. I mean, I had steam coming out of my ears, and mostly everybody I talked to, they're like, "That interview was amazing," but I have no clue what it was about. But I really enjoyed it, and I think that's just shows to speak that you're speaking from experience. I mean, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time,
Right.
Ananda Bosman, we've been following him for a couple of years. Josh, a lot more than myself.
Well, I would say, 1 year. I think it's very new for me. Your material is very new for me, but I'm diving in. I'm doing nothing but reading your materials, and I'm just really, really amazed and blown away. And I just want to mention that it's very interesting to read that you wrote a lot of stuff in the 80s and in the 90s and in the 2005 and 6 and 4 and a lot of this material I'm seeing now out there in the mainstream new age scene being presented as their own material from so-called very famous people out there. And so, and I remember I asked Ananda in private, like what's going on here? And he was like, yeah. So we don't talk too much about that, but
one gets kind of fame waves. Like I've had audiences of 600 people, and but it's old people, so esoteric people, and then they're about to die, and they say, "Oh my God, what you spoke about 20 years ago is all happening now," and then you hear died. So you're kind of seeding 20 years before, and the cognition of it takes a while to settle in. So I'm aiming more at the younger generations.
So to back up, before we go down the rabbit hole this time, if you haven't tuned in the first time, so Ananda Bosman, check out the links below from his other podcasts. You had an NDE, near-death experience when you were 15. That altered you significantly or several times. You've been involved with many extraterrestrial phenomena, and you've translocated your physical body at one point with witnesses at one point. That's all interesting. We've covered those stories.
Inside UFOs. Speaking to the Emmanuels.
Yes.
Channeling the most, by the way, epic information I have read in a long time, if ever. You've been around the block, many blocks.
Yes. And what's prominent, what is prominent for me, what I see right now, what we're tuning into as we've been discussing your material, is you've been deep down the rabbit hole, deeper than anyone I've ever met, on the topic of what's really going on here and what is the veil that's been pulled over our eyes, which we're just beginning to discover. But it turns out, and what I see is that you're 30 years ahead of this.
Yeah.
And so I think the topic of this interview, let's get focused on that. And you've prepared some slides, and you've prepared a lot of things, and you guys have been discussing questions and things. It's like, let's really see the veil for what it is, and it's deeper than any of us could have ever imagined in terms of how this universe works and what we've been brainwashed with. Like, what we're tuning into is that the most esoteric, prized, sacred cows that we can prize in the new age community, such as quantum physics and how the universe is structured and multi-dimensions.
Don't mention quantum physics. You're gonna put him on a rant because that died in 1936, right?
When it was kind of born in 1934, so it's really old physics. We'll come to that a bit later.
Yeah.
So where do we want to begin?
Well, you started with this whole veil and the rant on the veil.
Let's talk about UFOs. You've prepared some papers, some privileged information that was shared with you.
Yeah, let's start with that. So you were given some privileged information in 1992, and you sent me some material on it yesterday, but I did not have time to go deep into it. But I kind of just skimmed it.
Yes.
And it looks like the United States government knows a lot more than what they're telling people.
Yes. Well, we had a few near-death experiences. Actually, one before the 1985 one, when I was 11 in Forest Row, East Sussex. I went to the Michael's Hall Steiner School there, the oldest Steiner School. And we were in the town hall as a disco. And there was Coca-Cola all over the floor and Fanta, and, these kind of things. 7-Up. 1981. And a guy called Terry Knight is running up against me, and I slap the back of my head on the floor, and everything is black. It's completely black. There is nothing whatsoever. After a while, I realized I am looking at that nothingness. And when I'm looking at that emptiness, I'm aware that I'm aware, and that awareness becomes a light. And that light is like 360 degrees all around. I'm also aware that somewhere there is some kind of hyperlocations beyond that vacuum, and they haven't.
When you say hyperlocations, that means different levels of dimensions or universes.
I would say more like past, present, and future universes.
Okay.
But it was very vague because it was on the primordial existential level of consciousness, as you know from your own experiences. But then being this sphere of consciousness, which was my own consciousness light, I realized, oh my God, I haven't even begun to do what I need to do on this planet. I can't be dead. Having this intimate with these other universes, I can't be dead. There has to be a body down there. There just has to be. There's no doubt about it. There's a body down there. So I imagine I had arms, and I pulled myself in, made some willpower, the equivalent of willpower, and boom, I was back in my body, opened my eyes, and everything all right, mate, came from Terry Knight. And I said, yeah, I was gone for ages. He said, no, just a second, mate. So that was one experience that prepared me for the one that would occur a few years later in 1985, where I went beyond that vacuum state and was in that interactive hypersphere of the Emmanuels, although I would say that encompassing it was a kind of immaculate empty vacuum and void, and there were these beams going into the past and into the future. I had numerous experiences as a child as well. There's a lot to talk about that way, but the 1985 one is what really set the change. I came back. I went to the hospital because I had temporary amnesia. So for a couple of hours, short-term memory was breaking down. I just remembered portions of what had happened. And then I started repeating myself. I must have fallen off my bike. I must have hit my head. What time is it? And so I would ask every few minutes, what time is it? And this, of course, drove my mother and her boyfriend mad. So they drove me to the hospital. In the hospital, they did the brain checks, but they kept me overnight. I was fine. Come back on the Sunday morning and afternoon, and everything is not normal. The room is like filled with colors. There are these swimming memories of other planes, of other dimensions, of other planetary worlds. And I realized being a teenager, a 15-year-old, was just a social act. I said, I can't be this social act. I have to now get on with what I've come here to do. And so I didn't go to school anymore. I told my mother I came from another planet. Which is like, yeah, I come from another planet. And
so how did she react?
What, sorry?
What did she say to that?
Yeah, sure. So I took her outside, used my heart will, called the ships. They switched on, they stopped, their pulse flashed, responded, moved at different angles. So she didn't know what to say. And
hey, Mom, I'll show you. Come out in the backyard. There they are. The UFOs just come.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And I was 15. And,
like, okay, you don't go to school.
Well, then I got the Emmanuel College, So then I got this streams of information, golden information and living images, where one image is every other image you can imagine. And also the UFO phases. There are actually different layers of experiences that would occur. I think last time I talked a little bit about what I called extra temporal virtual reality, ETVR. There was also the OOBE phase. I've been working on that recently. I've been the last few weeks making loads.
Say pretty quickly for people who are listening what OOBE is. It's out of body experiences.
Out of body experiences, which is kind of different to the ETIVR. But there is a bit of overlap. In those phases, when I was 16, 17, I would be taken with guidance through all these, the so-called planes of the afterlife. I've just now put that together into a multimedia show to show exactly what those are, to construct, because we construct we show the governor, and then we deconstruct or hyperconstruct, because a lot of people are caught in the contraptions of these things. Nevertheless,
Yes.
people experience the ghosts, they experience their loved ones contacting them in their dreams. People experience others who have died being in limbo state. So we went through each of the planes, what they mean to the singularity of light, because the 7 so-called planes of the afterlife are within the light computer valve. So just the light singularity, not the infinite singularity, which is the upper octave of our plane. And we went in great detail with each component. And putting the emphasis that these are not realities per se, these are not stuck places, they're illusions. Much like a guru will produce a lot of visions, and those visions can be very, very shocking, or they can be used as medicine. And my experience with, at least that's how I've experienced it with people who have passed on, who come back in contact, appear to come back and contact me, they use this fabric of these 7 planes as a linguistic interactivity. With my translation experiences, which have been quite varied, the one where I was in June of 1972 in the Swiss Alps, and I went into the Golden Sphere and disappeared for some hours, and my mother had to make a search party to find me, because I was 2 years and 7 months, and she was busy painting the Alps there at 3,000 meters. There, I just remember going into that golden light and going into a vacuum. That very, very often happens, but it's a vacuum that is linked through networks that are kind of periphery whole, going to further nodes of vacuums and light. Also, when I disappeared in 1988 in one of those nodes with the UFO to Charlotte Aldama and my mother, and I turned into blue, and there were patches of blue remaining. My whole heart will, again, embodied in the body, was to the love of the ultimate, all is God of all oneness. And that is basically what I was experiencing. But they put their hand there, there was no body left. Whereas,
so can I quickly ask, when you had that experience that all is God and God is all, did you have...
It's different. All is God. God is always very, very different. So the Emmanuel cosmology that came through went beyond the Copenhagen loop of infinite regress, which is the contraption on the idea of God that was introduced by the Hindus, the Purusha, which was the Purusa before, where Purusha becomes encapsulated by Prakriti, his female consort, as practical matter. So God is in all. There's a big problem with that in the Copenhagen loop of infinite regress. It would mean that God is separate from the creation. And then who created God? And assumably the creation was made in a vacuum. So who made the vacuum? Who made the creator? Who made the creator of the creator and the creator of the vacuum? And this becomes an infinite loop of infinite regress. With all is God, it means there is simply an alone being that is absolutely everything, uniquely and totally and utterly God. So that concept is beyond the duality of fast and light, slower than light, which is generally used to make materialism and spirituality. The kind of cosmologies that emerged from the Emmanuels was the idea of the unity self. The unity self can take something like the higher self, which would be our 7th body at infinite speed, at the speed of thought, which for our reference of length, width, and height, X, Y, Z of rotation, so-called 3D, would have to have 3 kinds of infinity. The negative infinity, which would be the index to eternity or emptiness, positive infinity as a singularity, and their integer, which is positive and negative, or negative and positive, and then the permutations, the pure thought-on plane, which of course can divide itself by embedding itself, and then you start to get a unified field plane. The lower self, so-called finite, from electrons and the hadrons, the nuclear particles, to the plasmic, the Kirlian, all the way to the plane of light, the speed of light, singularity. So that's 3 levels, and you have 3 levels from infinity to unified field to pre-matter, just a bit faster than light. And then you have where the 2 overlap, which is the middle domain. This middle plane is virtual, is spelled non-local, electrogravitic, magnetic gravitic. It's the nonlinear aspect of 8 cycles, and appears to be the foundation of things. The unity self, or the atomano of the
you said it used to be the foundation, or it is the in-between world.
The middle used to be the foundation. It's a bit like the principle of the emerald green in the rainbow, which goes to all of the colors equally and incorporates all of the colors equally to produce coherent light. I think that is a parable kind of to these 7 bodies, which is just part of our particular color spectrum dimension in the models that we're given. There are endless color spectrum dimensions, but generally 7 on a hypersphere. We'll come to the 512 dimensions, which is one of the most exciting things today up ahead. So the unity self is already the unity of the higher self, the lower self, and all of those mid-bodies at the same time. So past, present, and future, obviously, the infinite self, which has 3 types of infinity. So the unity self is always the summation of all of that. It trinitizes itself in 3 aspects of all one unity, and you get the spectrum within itself, which are those 7 body planes, so it would appear. Now, recently, Dr. Sten Johansson did some very, very interesting breakthroughs in mathematics, which shows that in 1 second, the complexities of the animated human body, the equations occurring in the microtubules and the cell skeletons between DNA, neurotransmitters, organs, every equation is occurring in 1 second, requiring 512 dimensions, because he was able to generate all numbers completely and totally through an 8-dimensional times 8-dimensional times 8-dimensional system.
Good luck calculating
on that later.
Good luck calculating that in quantum physics.
Oh, in quantum physics, no, not possible. Single quanta, no way. So that's the beauty of these new mathematics. I mean, not this old-fashioned black and white TV mathematics, a car from 1934 with single quantums, which is not practical to a biological system. We're animate. We're so many different scales, it cannot be reduced to a single quantum. Our whole body can't be reduced to a single quanta. We're a myriad. We have 32 trillion cells, each of which have a cytoskeleton made of microtubules, which have the ability, according to Dr. Stuart Hameroff, to have the whole somatic experience of our body. So our whole body can be calculated within just one single cellular skeleton microtubule network in terms of computing power. So that enables us to actually be 32 trillion different versions of ourselves alone, should we consciously or superconsciously engage the computing of a cellular cytoskeleton system.
So what does that mean for the average human being knowing this? Like, so now that we know that we are fluctuating between 512 dimensions and just within 1 second, what does that mean? What does it mean?
It changes everything. We perhaps come back to that in a slideshow, because it means that reality is not what it seems, and there is no real 3D. We've assumed it from a physics point of view, which has been static and not animate, and which has problems creeping up. It doesn't have invariance to biological systems. It's been a big problem in all different physics branches. The new physics, or hadronic physics, pioneered by University of Torino and then Harvard University, Dr. Ruggiero Maria Santilli, who formulated this quite a while ago, but made it practical within biological sciences in 1990, when Dr. Chris Illert was able to use it to simulate primitive life forms. It's a completely new mathematics that unifies all previous mathematical theorems, called isotopic mathematics, which is not dimensional, it is interdimensional. So and it's interaxion, so it can take the midpoint of view from matter and antimatter as a single unit that are indivisible. In a simple explanation, you can take the cube of 3D length, width, and height, and put an interlocked tetrahedron to take the vertices. And one of the tetrahedrons, you'll put an isotetrahedron on it. That isotetrahedron, which is mirrored to the one in the cube, is within the hypercube. And the hypercube is then so-called four-dimensional cube, where each of the cubic faces bites the other faces 180 degrees, which is 1 second of so-called 4D. So the isotopic plane can be put through all the 7 spatial dimensions in Octonian physics. And Octonian physics is 8-dimensional plenum or 8-dimensional hypersphere. And so Dr. Sophus Lee was the one who developed Lie algebra. He took an invariant triangle, a triangle where the vertices extend to infinity, and this becomes then a torus donut, essentially, a toroidal field. So it's part of the torus equations. Yeah. Because the lines come from infinity back to the vertices. This is the Sophus Lee equations of the invariant triangle. Now the heart has, in the left ventricle, 7 layers of heart muscle, which was demonstrated by a British scientist, Dr. Lawrence Edwards, in the 80s in the Vortex of Life. These 7 layers of heart muscle each produce a toroidal magnetic field as the heartbeat compresses and expands. And those 7 layers of heart muscles have 7 angles of spin, like the 7 angles of the vertices of a tetrahedron, which are also the 7 different angles that the rainbow photons appear to diversify on from coherent light. Water is also a tetrahedron, so you get coherent light, sunlight, passing through the water tetrahedron and going according to the 7 tilt angles of the water tetrahedron, producing the spectrum of the rainbow. So in one heartbeat, as the heartbeat expands, we're producing a magnetic toroidal tetrahedron. In compassionate love, these 7 spin angles gather together and become the golden proportion, become coherent light, a laser that extends forever. The golden proportion is transient to the 3rd dimension. And not only the 4th dimension, such as the Felix Klein bottle 100 years ago. Dr. Felix Klein made a single Mobius strip which would unify the subjective to the object and the objective universe into a single surface, torus or Mobius. That worked in quantum computing. It has worked in RNA modeling. But Dr. Melanie Purcell, who I met some years ago in 2006, Australian physicist, she's taken that to the Octonian 8th dimension. So the Felix Klein bottle now shows that the 7 dimensions upon the hypersphere, or the so-called 8-dimensional Octonian, are a single surface where the heart of every dimension is the heart of every other dimension as a single surface Mobius strip or an 8-dimensional Octonian Klein bottle. This is quite exciting stuff. So it means all dimensions are actually illusions, or they are actually spectrum reflections of something.
So all the dimensions is like a prism spread out from one light, from one consciousness, one source.
That would be an analogy, but it would be illusionary to say it is exactly that. It's just the axiom of the law of octaves and the law of what we see with light. So the principle is axiomatically there, but the division between having a coherence and then a spectrum, that division is illusionary because they're concurrent.
When I had my near-death experience, I shared it with you in email a few weeks ago. When I had my near-death experience, I went to the other side, and then I went to another, so I went into another world, and then I could move into there was another level of world. And then suddenly I realized that all of these layers of realities were just forms of, because I realized when I looked back at the dead body that the whole life that I had lived was just an illusion. It was just a dream. It wasn't real. That realization was instant. That it was just like watching a movie, and now you press stop on the button and the movie's gone.
Yes.
But then when I observed the world I was in, I saw that it was the same case.
Yeah.
And then the next and the next and the next, so when I came back, I just knew that it's all what they call Maya. It's all illusion. It's
the Maya itself is the medicine. So and that's the beauty of it. So it's not a contraption per se. We did explore that in our book, the 1999 book, The Unit Keys of Emmanuel, where we look at the enzymatic and the enzymatic gods of the biological universal body, and the enzymatic gods having a binary system, black-white brotherhood system of management to keep a balance in the universal body. It's an interesting anthropological or anthropomorphic analogy. It doesn't make them necessarily evil. It keeps the code alive. And now what we're having is that there is this evidence that the heart in compassionate love with intent will actually produce changes on the DNA, and any other state will not. So for the first time, we're hacking the DNA, or we're having genetic free will for the first time. We're not genetic robots anymore, but thank God we were genetic robots, because if we could program our DNA based on our daily experiences as they have been of late, we would have been long gone. So it's been preserved by these archetypal domains, which are very, very real, very alive, and also represent real other universal domains at the same time as so-called interpersonal archetypal genetic preservatories. These then enable us today to consciously harness by biofeedback and have it objectively registered that we're producing about 73 BPM, the circadian pulse is what it shows on the feedback biofeedback device, and you start to produce coherence, the golden proportion, and you can focus on DNA samples, choose it to coil or uncoil or change in the middle, as the HeartMath Institute has demonstrated, and even produce 3 different results at the same time, which for the first time shows that compassionate love or biological coherence with willed intent produces a result that is not electromagnetic. So here, compassionate love is non-electromagnetic. It's non-linear. It produces 3 results at the same time, even half a mile distance. So the result that is then produced is either going to be as coherent as what the DNA is already, because it's completely constructed out of the golden proportion and the binomial sequence. It's a sacred architecture, or more coherent. So we are robots until we claim the heart of the Maya, what's buried in the Maya.
Wow, that's beautiful. I mean, if people really understand what you're saying, it's pure poetry. It's creation is like such a divine song, right? And so, and it only sets us fully free. I mean, we are only setting ourselves fully free when we move into a more coherent experience of reality, which is the compassionate love.
It becomes the horse, the interactive horse, the modem, so to speak.
Yeah.
The existential observer is always there, and the existential observer is changeless. It is immaculate, imperishable, and this, by self-inquiry, is evident for anyone who observes their own ontological being. It's they're always the same. You can try to grasp an awareness of it, but that will be a series of conjugated mirrors, which then have their whole trickster policies, which, depending on how much you attach to them or reflect upon them, will give you varying types of experiences, from negative by too much attachment, reflection, which can lead to remembrance of cognition again. So the horse of coherence, of biological coherence, of compassion, does become very useful for our ontological observer to then begin to interact with the computer system that we would appear to be in. We've a very specific model on that, which would require some slideshows. Now,
let's do the slideshows. Let's cut to slideshows. Can we see the slideshows?
Okay. So a bit of introduction here. So I was asked about this privileged material, which I mentioned to Mel Fabregas some years ago in an interview. Afterwards, he had asked me just one question enough. I gave him the material, but it never went public there. Last year, I think exactly 1 year ago, on the 11th of November, on the 9th of November, it was released to Janneke van der Brink. So
I like this name Janneke. It's like Janneke from the.
Janneke.
It's an ancient Vedic name, right?
Yeah, it is. It's from the Ramayana, basically.
Yeah.
So she is a journalist, but she has not so sacred radio. She had a lot of lifetime of experiences with gurus, spiritual systems. Has a much more critical view now. And she did a darkroom retreat with us in 1993. And I just met this Sir Geoffrey Peveril Pinder, who was a bard of Queen Juliana, who was based in Den Haag.
You know what a bard is?
Yeah. Enlighten me.
Okay, what's a bard?
Well, there are different levels of bards. The bards, of course, come from the Druidic systems. They're the knowledge keepers. They have the secrets of bloodlines, secrets of code systems. Cryptology comes from that. In this particular case, the Peveril family claim 12 to 33,000 years of multi-generational bardship, and claim to know the language computer. So I should put a bit of background to this. I was coming down from the Swiss Alps, the place where I disappeared when I was 2 years and 7 months, and had 3 days of contact there. I came down, went to Geneva, gave a weekend seminar, and there were some participants who were sub-members of the Order of the Golden Fleece. There are numerous orders of the Golden Fleece. And said, well, the way you're speaking and the things you're talking about, we know someone you need to speak to who's saying the same thing and has the evidence of this, and was tutored in this his whole life from the age of 4. He's called Geoffrey Pinder, and he's knighted. So, but we have to first give your name, your details, and he has to speak to you. And so he got my details. He has a language computer. I can go into some detail into the language computer. The language computer is based on the way the return valve, that syntax is made according to the speed of light around the planet in a grid system. But I'm getting ahead of myself. He agreed to meet with me. He put me in the computer, it all worked out. And so I was one of the first people outside of the secret societies that he spoke to on this material. And he, over the years, showed me extraordinary things. The foundation of their understanding is that there is a fast and light universe where everything has already happened. Then there is a contraption. There is a series of computer-like systems that traps the superluminal into a valve. They often call it the cat flap. That valve is a non-return valve. It's like when electrons have to release energy as they change their orbits, they have to capture a fast and light photon into the atom and release it. And that's what they control, these computers.
That's epic. That just completely explains the boson phenomenon of how when bosons form, photons come out.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So everything that happens here is then an echo of what's already happened, but it's modulated through these computers. That's what they believe. So he showed me basically how the cartography of the whole planet is laid out artificially according to this computer system. So you have the place names and the cartographical shapes of continents mirrored by pi again and again and again. So the shape of the map of England you will find by nearby Lake Geneva on a smaller scale, linked by pi and isosceles triangles. and the place names also mirror. I don't know if this share is on, if you can see the images here.
We can see it. It works.
Yeah. Okay. So the first slide here is basically some of the material that remain that I still have, because Pinder died in 2006, and our go-between was asked to return all of the stacks of material she had. But luckily, I have this. And this includes letters to the Buckingham Palace. And this particular letter shows how the coding works. They make some small mistakes. The date is the 22nd of February, and the code of Pinder is 222. So 22 of the 2nd, 222. On the 22nd position, you have 2, and from the beginning and from the back, you also have 2. So you have this 222 connotation. Through some grammatical errors, he extracted a game board from this. The game board is, I have a remnant of a picture here. It's not very high quality, but it's what remains. It's over the whole planet. There is this lineup of degrees and place names. The middle of this game board, the whole overall game board is 88 degrees, 888, so to speak. Then in the middle, you have 8 coast. So it's a phonetic 8. And it's at 816 degrees, and 16 is 88. So you have 888 in the middle, and this lines up to places that have the name 8, or that have coat of arms with an 8-pointed star, etc. The way that place names work in the language computer, what he was able to demonstrate was from his 1986 computer system based on Oxford of 1986. He could take any language source, 126 languages he was trained in over 60 years. At 16, it was the Archbishop of Canterbury that trained him in this cryptology behind creation. So he would go through the Greek, the Hebrew, the Akkadian, Sanskrit, etc. And putting the word into the computer, you get a word string, and you put that onto a piece of paper, and you can fold the key words as they refer to each other like a Mobius, and then the words will line up perfectly. The words that line up perfectly, you put into anagrams, and then you put that on a folded paper and they overlay. The implication of this system is that all languages, whether ancient or current, are arranged in a system meant for the Oxford Dictionary of 1986. That's quite profound. Here is a picture of...
That is, wow. That's wild.
Yeah. So this is Sir Geoffrey Pinder before I met him, when he was in Den Haag, creating the International Intermediary Company. Is my mouse pointer showing?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, good. This gentleman here. He would also show that, let's see, he would show in the works of Shakespeare or Cicero, where you have the errors, here we go, J.P. Pinder, Geoffrey Peveril Pinder, in relation to the picture. So he would show how the error in Shakespeare, the erroneous volumes, which are available in some very specific libraries in England and only open at certain times, sometimes once in 10 years, holds the code. Part of it is, of course, that the creators of Shakespeare, which includes Sir Francis Bacon, upgraded the English language. He was trained by Dr. John Dee, who was the special cryptologist for Queen Elizabeth, but then was sent to France, to Paris, to Le Pléiade group of philosophers, where they decided to upgrade the language to create cognition, more awareness, part of the Renaissance. So Sir Francis Bacon came back to England and introduced 10,000 new words to the English language and restructured the English language based on the Satapatha Brahmana. So that gave advantage to the Elizabethans. over the Vatican, who were using the Greek, the Latin, and Hebrew Kabbalic systems. Instead, they used Satapatha Brahmana because the arrangement of the semantic prose of the Vedas and Proto-Vedas is autocorrective. This has been absolutely demonstrated in 1985 when there was a NASA AIM study on ancient languages, and Sanskrit was found to have a neurosemantic network, to have triality in it. In fact, it was so impressive as an AI system foundation that it became the foundation of all artificial intelligence. There had been nothing that far advanced. So that was introduced through the Satapatha Brahmana semantic prose code into the British language. And Sir Francis Bacon is one of the Shakespearean co-conspirators shaking the spear. And it was through Shakespeare that this language would be acted out and people would be saturated with it and would start to bring out these terms which make one cognitive. It makes one more auto-aware and able to give expression to the spirit and to the soul, which was more difficult before. And so that was part of the Renaissance. But that's one part of Shakespeare. The other part is what is put through the heads of those who construct it. Because in the Pindar map, I have various forms here. This was the African part. This is how isosceles triangles link through pi. You've got, by Lake Geneva, the other side of CERN, which means Orion, you have the churches constructing Taurus, the bull, headed by...
CERN means Orion?
CERN Abbas in England. CERN Abbas is the great giant of Orion. It's an old term for Orion. And so CERN is really in the position at the Dolphin Lake, Lake Le Mans, of Orion above. And opposite it is the Taurus, the bull, which is made out of many churches, all of which have names of bull or have the bull in their coat of arms. And then there is the city bull. It's called Bull. And you have the Pleiades, which is nearby Vevey, Le Pléiade. Le Pléiade has a unique geological structure, which is called the Fleece, Le Fleece. This unique geological structure of Le Pléiade, you can take in grid lines and see it's the shape of the British Isles. The way that it is transposed onto the British Isles is done through the global game board with its associated isosceles triangles. This is the precession clock that goes over Lake Le Mans, Lake Geneva. This is Vevey, Le Pléiade is here. So there is an exact time and space orientation to the British Isles of how it is transposed. What is interesting is that on Le Fleece, next to Le Pléiade, you have the Nestlé administrative headquarters by Vevey. When you look at the English transposition of that geological feature, you have a Nestlé factory in England, and all the different names line up. The various geological features of Lake Geneva have their equivalents in England, but also all over the planet. So you have a very interesting cartographical phenomena taking place. Here's the Fleece, not the best quality. We'll have to enhance this, and how it transposes onto the British Isles. He showed me the whole planet like this. The whole planet is mirrored again and again and again. Whole libraries filled of these cartographical mirrors. So this is a secret map of Europe showing how the star maps are put onto the different areas of France and Germany, etc. And what's interesting is that they line up exactly with myths in the local area. Again, the coat of arms will have the names of those constellations. They align perfectly. For instance, at Orange, because the orange clock, which is called Clock of Orange, is the Old Paris clock. Paris means Orion, it's the god of Orion in the Trojans. So by Orange in France, which is not nearby Paris, you have to go down to the Gulf de Lyon. and a little bit up. If you go up to Orange, we have Mondragon, and at Mondragon you have the constellation of Draco. In fact, you have the heart star of Draco there. So I have another slide to show that way. Let's see if I can. Do I have to stop this to show that slide to get a keynote on?
I don't know, Kacper.
Just try closing this window and see what happens.
All right. Do you see the keynote? Do you see my screen?
Yeah, we're looking at your screen all the time right now.
No, because if you is it a different keynote?
This is now a keynote. The other was just a slideshow. Let's see if it works.
You have to stop sharing screen, do share screen again, but this time pick the whole desktop.
Good.
You can see in the same window.
All right.
How everything is connected, everything is linked. It's just like
we're just living in a giant computer program that's just
everything is represented in everything.
That absolutely, yeah. Because I spent a lot of time working with Tinder and updating his paradigm, because their paradigm is very specific in introducing Midway. Here you can see the constellation of the dragon by Mondragon. And this makes the precession clock through
Where is this?
This is the orange clock by Orange. And you have a lemon clock. The code is oranges and lemons, which is the pole star system. The pole star system then goes from Mondragon to Lake Le Mans, Lake Geneva. Now, phonetically, Le Mans sounds like a lemon, only phonetically. You'll find that mirrored, Loch Lomond in Scotland, with the Jura Islands, whereas it's the Jura Mountains that surround Lake Geneva. So all these place names mirror. So the pole star will be Vega in about 14,000 years, which is at Chateau de Eu, where you have the artist who made the models of Aliens, the film Aliens, having his chateau. So that's the lemon clock. All of the place names which have been placed over different times to give villages their names must have been put into the people's minds, because they exactly overlap to this whole procession system overlaid over the grids, and also follows mythological histories ascribed to the areas, like how Hercules would conquer the dragon near Orange, and so forth and so on. So they believed essentially that we're existing in a reality where everything has already happened, and there are two faster than light universes that are modulating these language computers. One group is called the Love of Power, and they were embodied by the Cecil family. The Cecil family were more overt during the time of Queen Elizabeth. It was the main advisor family of Queen Elizabeth. Now they're more covert. So they have their posh estates by Lake Geneva and other places. They're running things behind the scenes. The power of love and the love of power are the two poles they see the system as. The love of power maintains in their cosmology this computer hologram, this delay valve, by taking what's already happened faster than light through these valve computer systems, and controlling the outcome to some degree, modulating the outcome, and making it uncomfortable here, because they believe this is a soul washing machine. That's their words, not necessarily my understanding of it. But when the love of power, the lops, get too strong, the power of love, or the poles, come in and balance it. And this is always a pole shift reference that is used in their communications related to precession. Midway was not really evident there. When I did, in 1996, Tinder came to Norway, and we had 10 days together, and we shared some particular material, including the so-called Midway path. And when he started putting that into his computer when he got back home, and checking it through all of the maps of the laid out game board. Bingo, it was bingo. So he realized clearly this was a plurality of times that are involved in the construction, future, past, etc. His view when I met him was that much of history is artificial, it's being created, let alone periods of 1,000 years that have also artificially been constructed just in literature. That's something else to what was called the gravity field energy that would lay out the topological surfaces. There is some bearing to this from other researchers. And of course, I've met other people involved in this coding system. Geomorphology, it's the field, intelligent geomorphologies. The codings of Victor Hugo holds this code. He obviously clearly knew this partly consciously, not just put through his own head. The work of Dr. Karl Munk, who wrote the code, it was a very inspirational book for me in the early 90s. Karl Munk, you probably know his work. He showed
the Bible code. Is he the guy who wrote the Bible code?
No. The code is a 1980s book. What he shows is that Giza is taken as Greenwich Zero. And then he takes any temple like Chichen Itza, the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, and he adds together the numbers of stairs on each side, the levels, and what's at the cap. And when you multiply those, you have the minutes of arc seconds distance to the Great Pyramid. Now, he did the same with Stela 76 in the Yucatan, this very steep pyramid. The same code can be applied. Unify the number of stairs to the sides and multiply, you get the minutes of arc distance. Same with Stonehenge. Same with the Angkor complex. With all the ancient Easter Island, all the ancient sacred sites. But the problem with that is that, yes, they all have a reference to Giza being zero. And yes, you put all tectonic plates together and Giza is in the middle. And Giza is originally having white casing stones, which was made out of calcium carbonate, bones, which look like pyramids. So it's like trillions of micro pyramids originally on it. And yes, you can take the capstone of the Great Pyramid. It's 1/56th of the Great Pyramid. 1/56th, the Great Pyramid is 1/56th of the Giza plateau, which is 1/56th of the Nile Delta, which is 1/56th of the Nile, which is 1/56th of Africa. Africa is 1/56th of planet Earth. You have these interesting things. But that all of these ancient temple architectures, spanning thousands of years, some of them are very recent, like the Machu Picchu, etc., and some are very, very ancient, all have the same readout to a zero Greenwich meridian, which is Giza, indicates that this is artificial. This is all a computer readout from the universe. And since one finds this in the Pinder code work, one finds it in the books, in the literature. I have a friend working on the Victor Hugo work. He's a geomorphologist and is finding extraordinary things there. Absolutely extraordinary. At one point, it's going to be published in as much of an academic way as possible. Other findings are emerging, inspired on the Pinder work. The Pinder idea then is, this is all artificial. I saw it when I was 22. I already had that cosmology. I had my experience. But then to have the rationale, seeing the empirical evidence of all of the maps, physical maps, laid out and linked to each other, a whole room laying out the planet, and all with the same geological, topological features, mirroring each other, having the same place names, having the same precession cycles. That is extraordinary. So that was part of the Pinder material. And Janneke van der Brink, who interviewed me a year ago, she went to a darkroom retreat of ours in 1993 in Norway. And during that darkroom retreat, I played several cassettes of my first interviews with Pinder, each of which are extremely complex. In the darkroom, of course, the pineal gland is producing its own endogenous ayahuasca, endohuasca, we call it today, the penolines, 5-MeO-DMT, and by the 8th day, DMT. Janneke said she was tripping stronger than the 60s. So she was completely saturated in the Pinda material, went back as a journalist to the Netherlands and told the story to some friends, one of which was a comedian. So the comedian, unbeknownst to Janneke, appears on television and makes a joke. He says, well, if anyone wants to know anything about decoding, just contact Jeffrey Pinda. That was the joke. No one knows Jeffrey Pinda.
Yeah.
But Den Haag was observing it. This was their guy. The international intermediary company was created by Pinda to facilitate to negotiate spirituality into the materialistic systems of the ruling systems and abilities. That was the prime foundation of that, or the idea behind it. I have papers that I think we have the links for, which show the letters of its foundation, and where you saw that picture of Pinda was at the creation of the International Intermediary Company. Well, I explained, because Pinda must have realized that I must have been the leak. I basically explained I did a retreat. We listened to your material. This friend found it amazing. Told her friend, who was a comedian, who decided to put it on to television as a joke. So it wasn't a problem, and we continued detailed work. In 1998, he gave me a letter which was purported to be coded by Queen Juliana, and I don't know if it is created by Juliana, but it certainly was deeply coded based on this lemon and orange clock of Lake Lemont and all of the different names of that region. Now, my grandfather and grandmother met pretty much at the position of the tip of the lemon clock at Les Saints or Aigle. My grandfather had TB. He was at the University of Sorbonne in Paris, went up there as a cure. My grandmother was a nurse. And they met that way. He would breathe the fresh air in the snow. Suddenly a golden light came over him in the early 20s. And he found himself making a sculptured head, which is what led him to becoming a sculptor. Not far away from there is where I disappeared by Sion, in the mountains above Sion, into the golden sphere when I was 2 years and 7 months, and had further contacts in 86 and 92. And we did a dialogues with the cosmos a couple of years ago, where we had results as well, really good results, very interesting. I could creep up really close and capture it on film for the first time. This letter of purportedly by Queen Juliana was very well coded. I've been trained in this coding system, I think, as I mentioned in the previous interview. In 1986, I went to the high Alps above Sion, and we stayed at a family chalet there by Feu Pecla under the glacier. And I was with my mother and her husband at the time, Jeff Sedgwick, and the UFOs, of course, came, as we were quite familiar with. One of the UFOs pulsed a golden beam into my left eye and my mother's right eye. And then during the night, I continued to work with them. They would come out of Le Piquet, the Pyramid Mountain, and fly around, interact with me, and then told me to go into ET, virtual reality, extratemporal virtual reality, where you get a beam, you get a somatic fusion, and then you're traveling. And where I traveled was into the Dent Blanche glacier, where there was an underground city. That's how I experienced it. From that, there was a dome translation to Ganymede, where I went into a sublunar base, which was really an omnijective space, a transliteral space. Whatever you are represented in the ETVR, the virtual yet somatic representation, the kind of like an augmented reality, I suppose, just real time and genuine to the soul and spirit. As one steps into those translinguistic rooms, all of one's psyche, all of one's soul is part of that room, all of one's characteristics, all of one's life. And another being walks into that room, they are represented in that room, even if they're coming from octaves unimaginable to our present experience. They will be axiomatically translated, and also all of their soul and psyche will be part of that room. So it's a kind of omnijective reality. And there I meet myself, and meet myself in as the experience of a self that travels all these different modulations. That is beyond any particular node or incarnation. That was my experience of it at the time. That's how I experienced it. Now I have different interpretations of what that really is, the whole UFO thing. It's physical, there's reality engineering going on, there's psychological, there is remote viewing, there is ETVR, these different contacts that take place. I believe all of that is part of a graphic interface of something that is hyper-terrestrial, that is these hyper civilizations and super civilizations. But I stepped into myself and I got the coding. So that was in 1986. I got my first understanding of how you take capital letters, take their place values, break them 1 to 9, how you reference capital letters or half of a word to the value of that half of a word in further characters, many things like that. And this is how Pinder also turned out to be working. And I got very particular instructions of that in my 20s with the UFO intelligences, and wrote whole discoveries on that, which at some point has to be published. So when I got the letter of alleged from Juliana, I applied all this, and I was online at that point. A few years later, that would stop, but online with the UFO intelligences. And in 3 days, I decoded it. So I sent that in the mail to Pinder from Norway, and then flew to Switzerland, gave a 5-day seminar, and popped by Vive and visited Pinder. And he then gave me a thick envelope, his chores and labor. He said, well, what you've decoded, it took me months to do because I had to follow the language computer and the return valve, which is a linear system. So he spent...
It's not fair. And Enda, it's not fair. You're cheating. You do in 3 days what he did in 3 months.
Yeah, because we used a kind of spherical holography. We didn't use the linear readouts, but nevertheless, it was the same logic. The spherical system exactly followed the linear system. So I've got some of the charts of that, and like Ananda's plot 3 and so forth. The Financial Times Monday edition, I think April 26, 1996, where the people that met in Norway with Pinder, all of our surnames are in that crossword puzzle, and that's a whole story unto itself. So the language system is very complicated in the linear readout. Now, what Pinder also was discovering was that by 1996, there was some error building up in the system. In other words, the code was changing. And that's where the idea of midway was important. It's like in the Matrix, you take the red pill or the blue pill. You say, no, you take the green pill because Zion is fake. It's part of Deus Ex. It's all a fake reality. And that's the alarming message of the 3rd episode of the Matrix. The first one, you think, yeah, this is what we're talking about. And then you kind of attach to it. And then you discover, oh, that's also fake. So the red pill is fake. So you take the green pill. That's a midway, so to speak. Yeah. The green line in alchemy.
Yeah, I was always upset about the fact that the Matrix continued after number 1. I think it was kind of game over. After number 1, it was game over. The fact that he started playing around in the other worlds was a mistake.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to share now another slide. I'm trying to get that one, but it's not doing that. Here we go. Do you see this, the golden proportion and stuff?
Yes.
That's okay, good. Except here we go. Okay, now this idea of 512 dimensions in one second for biology came about through several stages, and it was published in San Marino Congress of Computational Methods and Sciences and Engineering, I think in March of 2013. Several different aspects were published. First, there was the Dr. Alexander Animalu paper, and Animalu is really important because he's the discoverer of iso superconductivity, which is superconductivity at body temperature. Animalu works together with Santilli, but he's not banned like Santilli, so he's recognized. And Animalu shows here the work of Dr. Chris Illert with conch-shell morphology. Dr. Chris Illert in 1990 was computer simulating conch shells. Conch shells are beautiful things, and there's about 100,000 of them. The conch shell morphologies by Euclidean mathematics could not be simulated as an animated form. They would crumble. So the Platonic symmetries, the Euclidean means of constructing animate things didn't work. Luckily, he was aware of the new mathematical plane, the isotopic plane. So he utilized the isotopic plane in his computer simulations of conch shell morphologies. He had to take one further new plane, which is called the genotopic plane. The genotopic plane is where the basic iso unit, if you want to see it graphically, take two triangles or two tetrahedrons base to base. That's an isotetrahedron or an isotriangle. It has an iso-self dual, and that is the iso unit. It's iso-self dual flat. It's the flat Earth, flat universe. It's the foundation that you can't go less. It will incorporate all the symmetries we know, but it will also have an axiom to antimatter, and it's iso-self dual. And this is now complete practical applications in hadronic astronomy, where antimatter cosmic rays, antimatter gamma rays, asteroids have been detected for many years based on this new physics. When you take that basic double triangle interlock iso unit and fractalize it so that it becomes triangles to triangles to triangles, that's the genotopic plane. And the genotopic plane applied to the conch shell morphology shows that as a conch shell unfolds and bifurcates, branches off, it's aware of 6 arrows of time. These 6 arrows of time, you take the moment as a cube where you have normal forwards time and by Newton's third law backwards time. You have a cube of the past time, which also has a forwards and backwards time, and you have a cube in the future, which has a forwards and backwards time. All these 6 arrows are evident in every moment of unfoldment of a so-called 3D conch shell morphology. You apply that to 100,000 different conch shell morphologies, showing that primitive life uses 6 dimensions of time travel to be consistently Euclidean to Euclidean sensors appearing as 3D. This is also evident in trees that raises their sap against the laws of inertia at very high altitudes. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. But by the genotopic plane, they will simply time travel, shift the time arrows, interactivities, to enable the sap to time travel up against so-called inertia. The beauty of these planes is that it also describes biological systems invariantly, which wasn't possible before. It predicted, for instance, that planet Earth would replenish gas and petrol, now announced again under America. This will happen periodically because reality is not what we think it is. Now, these are very primitive life forms, conch shell morphologies. When it comes to humans, we're much more complex. We have the microtubules, the cytoskeleton, and these are beautiful technological systems there. A beautiful ordered water in the middle. You have alpha and beta tubulin, each of which are about 4 nanometers. So the overall AB, alpha beta tubulin, is 8 nanometers, well inside the physics of the nanotechnological domain. Each of the alpha and beta tubulins interact with enzymes, with amino acids, with neurotransmitters, and the microtubules are structured according to the Fibonacci system, one form of one expression of the so-called golden mean, but as the Fibonacci. And I think it was Dr. Lambda, which we published, cited in our book, The Unity Keys, in the 90s, who did dark field microscopy on the microtubules and found them to be spiraling cubes in structure. Now, the water inside the microtubules is so ordered that it's Bose-Einstein condensate. And Bose-Einstein condensation, or super ordered water, cannot be properly modeled by quantum mechanics. So Dr. Ruggiero Santilli in 2014, I think it was, in March, was able to exactly and precisely model Bose-Einstein condensation as a form of hadronic superconductivity, which changes everything. So the water that is in the cytoskeleton, the skeleton of our cells, which is very, very complex, is also superconducting or isosuperconducting. So it is linked to this time-traveling plane, the genotopic and even the hypertopic plane. Every interaction with the alpha and beta tubulin is a series of mathematical equations, and we have 32 trillion of these cells, and each of these cells is this supercomputer called the cytoskeleton, which has the ability, the capacity to take all of the information we experience right now in the whole body 32 trillion times. The interactions are taking place, the Bose-Einstein condensation of water is changing as a result, and all number equations are taking place in our body in a second. Now, Dr. Sten Johansson from Trondheim University, we have his paper up here. He'd been studying our work and sending some of his anthropology students to do our diamond body training, 10 days training with over 200 different exercises in unifying all 8 opposites of the body in 8 cycles per second, and unifying the macro system, the trinitization core propulsion system that we'll use. It's a very practical, detailed system. And he utilized that, knew Dr. Santilli. He introduced me to Dr. Santilli. I was a bit skeptical to begin with. Translated the hadronic mechanics jargon to our jargon, and that was when our eyes opened and said, well, you were one of 10 people who made the same discovery. Our intergeometry, our so-called vortexia, is basically the ISO unit modeled in a 3D unification of the ISO unit nucleus and periphery. There were 9 others who'd made that discovery independently. We, of course, were on the lowest of that list, but nevertheless, we discovered it independently. For me, it came from experience. Then, in 1994, I put it into Super 3D and started computer animating it from tetrahedrons, based on the tetratoroidal model of Lawrence Edwards, based on the heart and the 7 layers of heart muscle. So he also went into dark rooms, and then he was developing a wide series of different fields. He knew the Sophus-Lee physics, which had not been able to be reconciled with the Felix Klein 4-dimensional Mobius strip. They were friends, but they weren't able to reconcile these 2 different physical branches. Or the Octonian 8-dimensional physics. Lie algebra of Sophus-Lee had been dropped, but by the Santilli ISO unit, when it is ISO lifted, it becomes completely valid and dynamically so to model the 7 dimensions on the 8-dimensional Octonian. Well, he took, and his girlfriend for a while was Dr. Melanie Purcell from Australia, who had taken the Klein bottle 8-dimensional Octonians. So many, many different branches, including the binomial triangle, he utilized. So he took 8 dimensions times 8 dimensions times 8 dimensions and found that he could generate all composite numbers exactly and completely, and published in 2011. As his findings continue to be published, like at the San Marino Computational Methods Congress of 2013, he was able to demonstrate that there is no prime number problem anymore. It doesn't exist. It's been exactly and completely generated by a 512-dimensional system, where the numbers, the irrational and rational numbers, are ordered in this 8-dimensional times 8-dimensional times 8-dimensional system. So a little bit more of this number positioning system used, just an example, which is then laid out onto a keyboard. where you have the complete generation of composite numbers, and you have the black keys and the white keys, prime numbers and composite numbers arranged. It's a 512 hertz keyboard. So the A will be 432 hertz in that. 512 hertz is a very, very interesting frequency, because if you take water from the hydrogen bonds is a tetrahedron, first clearly demonstrated by Dr. Maria Puharish during the 70s, and then taken by Ruggiero Santilli to exact modeling, because the beauty of hadronic mechanics is you can exactly model atoms and molecules, taking the Rutherford model and correcting it by not having the limit of a single quanta, because you can deal with ISO units. The base pair of the DNA in a dynamic system doesn't break under 4, even if the DNA is replicating. 4 is always remaining as a foundation, so that's impossible with quantum mechanics, because you have 4 quanta, you can't do it. It's impossible. Not even a quantum computing with transparency can do that. Hadronic computing is a completely other thing, and it's fully developed. So the work on living systems was brought into more specificities by Dr. Ruggiero Santilli in modeling the water tetrahedron, still the water tetrahedron. The water tetrahedron is having a dielectric resonance of 8 cycles per second. So water, 72% of our body, has a dielectric resonance of 8 hertz. 8 hertz is the universal tuning, because the hydrogen atoms, single proton, 2 electron, have phase velocity differences in their orbital velocities. That is 8 hertz. And hydrogen is 90% of the whole universe. It's in every cubic centimeter of the universe. It's 92% of the atoms of our body. And the experiments that were done with 8 hertz, starting in the 50s by Dr. Puharish, it would pass through a vacuum, first a double vacuum, double Faraday cage. Now, that's supposed to block everything. The copper is supposed to block everything, and then the vacuum. But 8 hertz passed straight through. By the 70s, it was a triple vacuum. If it passes through a triple vacuum, it must mean that 8 hertz has a nonlinear or Bell non-local aspect that's virtual, that is past, present, and future. So it must ortho-rotate 2 times 90 degrees, 180 degrees. And this becomes a so-called 8 hertz ISO unit, where 8 hertz is local and non-local at the same time. Triple vacuum. So nothing blocks 8 cycles per second. The hydrogen stair steps of the DNA, made out of hydrogen atoms of 8 hertz, in their arrangement to the base pairs is also, this is quite complex, but is also a continuum of around 8 cycles per second. In order to produce replication of the DNA, the proton zipper of the hydrogen bonds need an even stronger specific signal of a certain level of Tesla or nanotesla to overcome the basic 8 hertz foundation and produce a stronger 8 hertz of a very specific kind, which unzips the hydrogen bond zipper, and the DNA can replicate, can go into the so-called quantum and mechanical universe out of that hadronic hyperdense material in which it exists. Now, the electromagnetic resonance of the absorption resonance of water, Dr. Puharish found, was 512 hertz. So he would electrolyze the 3 hydrogen atoms in the water tetrahedron by 8 hertz, excited. Electrolyze means excited, over 3 days and 3 nights, or 72 hours in sterile water. This excitation or electrolysis produces, after a while, the binomial cascade, which is 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 156, 512. When 512 emerges, this becomes the resonance absorption of water. So it's 8 hertz times 8 hertz times 8 hertz for the 3 hydrogen atoms in water. That produces 512 hertz. And when that occurred, a sideband resonance appeared in the signature, the spectrum signature, which was sonic. It had a ceiling of 712 hertz. We do have a slide on this somewhere, and a base of 360 hertz. and then 16 hertz increments for the whole tuning system, including 432 hertz. 512 hertz also then started to produce biophotons or bioluminescence. And at that point, amino acids started to appear as the basic foundation letters that build water started to change in their proportion. Amino acids started to appear, which became quite complex proteins by 512 hertz or 8 hertz electrolysis of water. So I find it very interesting because I was talking with Johansen in one of our cybernetics in Norway in 2001 about the 512 phenomenon, 512 hertz phenomenon, and the generation of complex proteins, and of course its relation to the so-called soma coma of Jesus in the tomb for 72 hours and the body of resurrection, which you also find in the Satapatha Brahmana, the Trika Druki, the 3-day soma ceremony, where you drink a very, very specially prepared, it can take years, 3 sets of soma cups 3 times a day in a dark room, and you go through a metamorphosis. You go into a soma coma, dead cells go out of the body, hair, teeth, and nails falls out, and other stuff is excreted through the surface of the skin, and then you're not allowed to look at a reflection of yourself like in the water, because for 40 days and 40 nights, because you're in a body of metamorphosis, according to the description of the Satapatha Brahmana, and then stem cells are regenerated and you become more youthful again. That's the first degree. There are levels of this where also dead cells are converted, and there is you basically have gone beyond the composition of the so-called matrix system. So that he then secretly took the hypertopic plane of Dr. Scintilla. This is the most extraordinary plane that exists. It's the hypertopic plane. We've explained the isotopic plane, which already unifies all mathematical theses, which is then fractal or holographic as the genotopic plane, which you use 6 arrows of time for animating or simulating a simple life. But with complex life like humanity and mammals, you have much more greater complexities taking place. Hypertopic plane is the unification past, present, and future in summation of all hypertopic plane. In our present universe, we have, for instance, the 11 dimensions, the vector dimensions, which is different to like spatial dimensions. The vector dimensions of Poincare symmetry. When that is put into the ISO unit, we have 11 and it's ISO, and it's ISO self-dual. So that's 44 dimensions. So for our present understanding of dimensionality in vector dimensions, Poincare symmetry. But by genotopic physics, there will be endless amounts of these 44 multi-valued hyperdimensions. And these endless amounts that are fractal and have non-linear, have hyperlinear, hyper-non-local, hypertemporal, hyperspatial, by the hypertopic plane indexing of past, present, and future. The hypertopic plane is the ultimate singularity. It was an all one singularity. It's not just singularity, it's an all singularity, because the all is eternity and the single is infinity, indivisibly co-present. So this all one singularity, macro irreversible plane is the hypertopic plane, which has been discovered in the research laboratories of many, many hadronic physicists and non-hadronic physicists in the literature. I received piles and piles of books and papers on this, which I spent in my 30s going through, meditating through, and absorbing in order to be able to popularize what has been discovered a little bit, so it's comprehensible, at least to some degree, for some people. Otherwise, it requires very, very particular physics training. I like the rationale of Rogero Santilli. He uses top-down thinking, so he thinks from macro going down, and that's also the implication of the hypertopic plane. So the hypertopic plane and the hypermathematics that adjoins it also eliminates all arbitrary connections. This, of course, has considerable implications on what reality is. He uses the hypertopic plane, Sophus Lee, Felix Klein, the work of Illert, and the work of Animalu, and creates this 512-dimensional system that generates all of the numbers exactly and completely. all of these 512, and it's modeled to 512 hertz keyboard laid out as a keyboard. So it follows the axiom of sound, of resonance that we experience. And since 8 hertz is occurring in every cubic centimeter in the universe, 90% of the universe, 8 hertz being non-local and local, this is the foundation, C tone, for all of the other octaves of sound. And so 8 times 8 times 8 hertz, the 512 dimensions of sound, are also modeled in this. So you get so-called linear, universal, and personal dynamics modeled through 512 dimensions, as 8 dimensions times 8 dimensions times 8 dimensions. Now, in about 1 second of animated life, through our 32 trillion cells, virtually every number equation is taking place by the interaction of the alpha and beta tubulin. So in 1 second of life, we must be at least 512 dimensional in order to be animated. That's just 1 second. 1 minute, we have 30,720 dimensions. And, take 1 hour and it starts to get really myriad dimensional. So this gets very, very complex. And luckily the hypertrophic plane is utmost simplicity because it's all oneness. It's a eternal singularity in that sense, eternal infinite singularity, which is at the foundation of the heart of the atom. The implications of this are profound. It means everything we experience, the sensory perceptions, color doesn't exist in the objective universe. There is no red out there. Even the eye cones are colorblind. It's only when the different light wave angles come in through and stimulate the visual cortex that we get the interpretation of red or green being out there. The sense of touch, it's a few hertz, tactile contact, producing chemical waves, which are non-Cartesian. Chemical waves was the end of the Cartesian universe in the 1960s because they have some nonlinear dynamics. The chemical waves are then interpreted into the sense of touch. This is something one would see, for instance, in the dark room. After a while, you do actually see things. The pineal gland is an atrophied eye. It's sensitive to ultraviolet, infrared, to microwaves, and to sound, and it jumps to the visual cortex. The DNA, of course, releases infrared photons, coherent ones, by bioluminescence, and ultraviolet, about 100 units per second. So this would be a potential for DNA TV that seems to occur. Furthermore, when you have a cup of tea in the dark room and you're moving around rapidly, dying, being reborn, and then you look and you see the cup, you see the infrared signature. If you then continue looking, you start seeing every cup you've ever seen being and constructing that cup. This is the nervous system becoming aware of itself and using the cup of least resistance, using every model of cups to construct the cup that one is experiencing. And this is continuously going on. The implications of the 512 dimensions is that this continuum is being computerized through 512 dimensions. A lot of people think higher dimensions, especially in the New Age movement, it's like, oh, it's a plane where it's more light, and you're not so heavy, and there's a greater harmony, and the sound and light starts to join. But that's just speed of light, singularity. When you get a light body that's at the speed of light, sound and all of the senses will become singularity. So you get a synesthesia. It's a light computer. It's still an illusion, but it's medicine. Like all of this is an illusion. I think all of these planes are occurring by what we really are existentially, which is the source of this 512 dimensional continuum generation that we call animated life. So a higher dimension doesn't mean that it's necessarily lighter and that you will have a light body that's separated from that dimension. A real topological fourth dimension is where you take the cube and you put cubes on every face of the cube, and then you have the right face kissing the left face, making a Felix Klein bottle, the front face kissing the back face, making a Felix Klein bottle Mobius strip, bottom and top Felix Klein Mobius strip. So it's kind of already a past, present, and future there for 1 second of the fourth dimension. DMT really it gives you little abstracts of the idea of four-dimensionality, but it's not yet four-dimensional at all. You have some other more near-death experience-inducing molecules like ketamine. Dr. Jensen working with people who had near-death experiences and then having ketamine, where you can, at the higher dosages, have the summation of the whole universe, past, present, and future, which is a little closer to the idea of a topological fourth dimension. And a topological fifth dimension, where you have 5 axes of spin and relations to time, again, it's more complex. All of these are still unified by a skeleton, an isoskeleton, iso-unit skeleton, which forms the 8-dimensional Mobius strip. But that's just one set of 8 dimensions times 8 dimensions times 8 dimensions. That makes 1 second of our animated body. So who we really are, it's something completely different. So it's extraordinary, the world we have today, from this perspective. There must be a lot of illusions. We almost believe those illusions. And we're partly pulling that off ourselves. At least the ontological foundation of self is doing that. So that, in a nutshell, is a little bit of the overview of the 512 dimensions in animated biology within 1 second, which I find extremely exciting. It's something that takes the context of the idea of ascending to a 5th dimension, etc., into a whole context. We're there already.
Wow. Okay, have this for breakfast.
Yeah, it's a 512 dimensional egg.
I feel like I've been raped by hyperintelligence. I don't know.
I've been raved.
Raped by hyperintelligence.
Raped. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's scrambled egg then.
Yeah.
But I have a question. So hyper civilizations and super civilizations. Now, when we spoke about, I'm reading one of your texts on the Manu, and basically that we have the 432,000 motor neurons in our brain, and they are connected. I'm most likely butchering what you wrote, but that we are connected to this 432,000 humanoid civilizations in the universe, which is the super civilization, and 1/3 of this super civilization is awake, and 2/3 is not, and we're kind of part of the sleeping part. And then, so correct me if I'm wrong. The super civilization is those 432,000 humanoid civilizations in this universe. The hyper civilization is all the universes combined that is created by some hyper civilization, or what? Where we are?
We actually need to distinguish there. Of course, the 432,000 Manusa was something we got through inspirational. Actually, there was UFO contacts. I filmed one of the plasmic ship, one of the rare times, in our mountain hut in Norway. So that was a download during the night, and then I went through and confirmed it through several days writing with the Vedic literature, and using the 432,000 syllables of the Rig Veda. Without going into the details first, I will come to that in a moment. The Manusa, the 432,000 species, humanoid species, some of them will be super civilizations, but what we have defined in our writings with super civilizations and hyper civilizations can be completely separate from those Rigvedic discoveries. So the idea is, if you take that light speed from the beginning of the universe takes 12 or 14 billion years to get here, and it's being observed by astronomers, and if you take the idea of the strong anthropic principle that there is no universe unless there is an observer to behold the universe, which is indivisible to the Aristoteles ontology, the science of being, where every experiment there is being first, and being gives itself qualities, definitions, and those definitions become definites. They become looped qualities that give hot, cold, the elements, etc. And embedded descriptions and somatic experiences of being are then brought into a series of looped recursions. And no experiment has been able to separate off ontological being. There was some scientists who thought it could be done with von Neumann machines, but it was then realized that every position of the experiment would be an ontological observer interacting with the experiment itself. And of course, the effect of consciousness on various forms of matter, not just Allen aspect, but the work with ruthenium, where ruthenium can be brought into a high spin state by microwave stimulation, where it will disappear to our conductive senses and steer, and when it is cooled down, it won't have moved because it warps time and space around in a form of Cooper pairing superconductivity. When the ruthenium is being heated and 64 flashes per second are being observed by scientists, 75% does not become high spin state, or a kind of superconductive singularity, the path of least resistance. No path in the universe can hold it, past, present, and future, superconductivity. So this is the dreamer part that is collapsing the actual process of the singularity that would otherwise occur. The anthropic principle says there is no universe unless it's being observed. So since we're seeing light from 12 billion years ago, there must have been someone to observe it. And so whoever was there to observe it will have had this window to be able to produce space technologies, time technologies, genetic engineering, will have gone through all possible genetic engineerings, stem cell research, then go down to nanotechnology, picotechnology, or maybe go directly to hadronic technology, femtometer technology, which is presently being developed, and therefore directly become one with the substrate of the universe itself and start universally engineering and having hadronic space-time machines. The hadronic space-time machines, like 4 years after Dr. Illert published in the Biological Sciences his discoveries with 100,000 conchal morphologies being 6 arrows of time, based on that, he developed space-time machines with Dr. Ruggiero Santilli, and also whole Stargate systems that would enable not just space travel or time travel, but also inter-universal travel, because in the hadronic model, all the different universes are right here, coexisting with their own time indexes and values, and myriad dimensional forms of complexity upon hypertopic simplicity. So these space-time machines will be developed very likely within a few hundred years, and have also been observed now by hadronic telescopes, which were used in astronomy some years ago, where you have a normal convex lens and a concave lens, which is then the ISO to the concave and the convex, so that antimatter light can be captured, which goes the opposite in sinus wave to normal matter light. And it works. So many astronomers all over the world have used these telescopes to see antimatter cosmic rays, all kinds of different antimatter astronomical objects. But the surprise a few years ago when they then turned the telescope into the environment and they saw these objects moving around our scientific places of interest, and being partly antimatter. Now, antimatter should not be able to operate in our material because you get big explosions, because matter and antimatter cannot coexist. They mutually destroy each other. But these objects were showing clear antimatter constituents. Then there were some which were isomatter, partly matter and antimatter at the same time. Now, the level of complexity to engineer that is way beyond anything we've got at present. And these things were moving in every case intelligently. And today you can get these telescopes yourself and see these things in the sky. And a lot of scientists are joining in and seeing they're there. So there is this super civilization that is using these kind of space-time technologies. But from the perspective of billions of years, we would have had, it takes a few hundred years once you've got some basic re-realizations of the laws of nature, like the hadronic mathematics, to have invariant systems, then you develop the computational systems. The computational system starts simulating life forms, as ILERT does, and you come to space and time travel. You need to time travel to space travel. So these super civilizations did that and could then also simulate their planet. Today we can simulate an atom. We're going on to simulate a molecule. Certainly with femto technology, in the advancement of corporate hadronic physics, this is becoming likely, as the exact nature of the molecular binding force has been demonstrated to be the hadronic fifth nuclear force, unifying field force. It's an attractive force that overcomes the four nuclear forces. And that uses the hypertopic plane of past, present, and future. In case you're wondering, the animation there, of course, is a fractal heart, and it's also a golden spiral at 72 degrees or 432 degrees, according to a 3D sphere, 72 plus from 360, 72 minus from 360. It's there because we used it in exemplification of the golden mean to the idea of the tunnel of light in some of the near-death experiences. And that the golden proportion is transient to 3D. The golden proportion goes 8-dimensional and 512-dimensional. Here's a Lawrence Edwards 7 layers of heart muscle, which produce 7 different toroidal magnetic fields, producing the 7 spin axes of the tetrahedron in the expanding of the heartbeat, a macrotetrahedron. And then as it compresses again, 7 toroidal fields joining as one. Now, when compassion is registered, it peaks at 8 cycles per second in the HeartMath early studies, which we have papers on. And all the 7 angles line up in the golden proportion, which is 72 degrees per toroidal donut. So here you've got a cascade of toroidal donuts embedded in the golden proportion. The golden proportion goes on forever. So here in this picture, you have, excuse me, the back one. I might have to go forward. So it just showed the graph of the heart at the moment of love peaking at 8 cycles per second. Excuse me here, forwards.
This is the HRV.
Excuse me.
What did we see before this graph?
I'm getting there again.
Okay.
Excuse me. It's a one single multi-layered complex slide. Here we go. So the heart at the moment of love. So you've got the electrodes on the heart. The heart is here. I'll move your window over here. This is 8 hertz, 8 cycles per second. That's the proportion of the torus donuts here is in the golden proportion. What was very interesting in that research during the early 90s was that the electrodes on the forehead showed that the heart at compassionate love also induced the golden proportion in the head, peaking at 8 hertz. Dr. Carl Pribram, the holographic brain theorist, couldn't believe this. So he took apart all of the computer equipment many times because he said that's not possible that the heart can affect the brain in such a significant state, because the alpha 8 hertz, one is in every single dendrite of the brain at 10 to the power of 12 bits of information per second, whereas in a normal beta rhythm, one is only at 10 to the power of 2 bits of information per second in some dendrites of the brain. So one has a whole one singularity in 8 hertz. It's the most significant brain state. 8 hertz sets up 4 hertz theta rhythm, 2 hertz delta rhythm, also 16 and 32 hertz beta rhythm embedded. So you can be these different spectrums at the same time. That's dream yoga, as well as higher binomial sequences. What was also found is that electrode by the belly, it didn't peak at 8 hertz, but the golden proportion signature also emerged in the cascade of electromagnetism from the region of life. Studies in Austria where the EEG, the electroencephalogram, is measured. When there is a contraction of the plexus coccygeal, which is the plexus that involves contraction of the anus, uterus, the prostate, the scrotum, the bladder. When you compress this mildly, there is an 8 hertz signature occurring in the EEG, which is quite significant because
that would explain a lot of the yogic locks, the locks they're doing. Yeah.
We absolutely utilize that. So we take the heart math, sustained coherence of the heart, and also utilize it with 8 hertz of life and all kinds of techniques with that, and 8 hertz of the mind. The 8 poles of the brain being unified at 8 hertz in Einstein imaging technique, as Dr. Reinhardt discovered. So where the mentally handicapped patients have to imagine contact with extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials, and as Einstein had proposed this, using the 5 senses. You taste the extraterrestrial environment, you smell it, hear it, feel it, and touch it. So, and smell and see it. Using these 5 senses and then speaking what you receive, Dr. Reinhardt found that all 8 poles of the brain were unified at 8 cycles per second. And because 8 cycles per second is all the dendrites of the brain, then you have the poles, and those poles are unified. And on top of it, you have the nonlinear aspect of 8 hertz, where 8 hertz is not blocked by a vacuum, by a Faraday cage. So you have a complete embodiment of the nonlinear non-locality with the most coherent computational form. Every dendrite of the brain, 10 to the power of 12 bits of information per second. That's the information of several galaxies. And then the 8 poles phase conjugating that. Produced scientific patents, which the 17 mentally handicapped will then channel or speak. And it was written up into patents and given to the US Patent Office. And all of those 17 patents worked as workable devices according to the judges on the Patents Office's board, who themselves are physicists. So applying this eightfold system as a core foundation is what we do in Mind Body training. And then we use that foundational engine, 8 hertz of the compassion, 8 hertz of neutral life, 8 hertz of the mind light reflection, combined together as opposites into whole body phase conjugation. So basically unifying all of the 8 hertz moments that are occurring all the time within our body on a macro unified field level, and unifying all the levels of that basic macro ISO unit. That becomes a UFO lens made out of the 8 hertz ISO unit macros, done by conscious intention and very specific energy protocols, over 200 different exercises and protocols that are combined. In the last few years, we could take the system that we first taught in 1994 and use the full hadronic language and all the hadronic physics into it. So it's a simulation of a hadronic space-time machine as hadronic biofeedback psychological practice, or neurocybernetics of hadronic mechanics. So that's been, I think, very, very pioneering work. I'm glad that's been done first by psychological experience, because the femto technology assemblers, I think, are getting some advanced, and they will self-assemble utilizing the femto meter range of the hydrogen atom, and then quasi-crystals will assemble into more platonic forms, which are modulated digitally, and that's a whole field unto itself. So at the foundation of compassionate love, the shape of the DNA, which is also the golden proportion, is phase locked at the peak of 8 hertz, which is also the division of 8 hertz. The DNA molecule in a single cell is having about an estimated 250 replications, which all occur at 8 hertz. So the very long DNA molecule is having 250 replications in a second of 8 hertz. So this is continuously happening in the formation of our body. It's how do we interact with it? How do we start to make this a useful cybernetic medicine that we can genetically co-create with? Within the Johansson slideshow, because this relates to the Johansson pictures, I'm not sure if this is going to continue. This would be the side view of the heart at the moment of love, showing the kind of laser of love and the golden proportion. The heart goes to about 72 BPM, is what we use in our music. It's a circadian pulse. Before the heart is formed in the fetus, there's a 72 BPM pulse there. I measured my daughter just before she was born, and she had 144 BPM. going on, which is twice 72 BPM. And this is healthy for a baby. It's also healthy when you're running, so twice the circadian pulse. The circadian pulse is that which tunes the unique time of each of the endocrine glands. So each endocrine gland is a symphony that is playing its own music with its own time, but these different times must be synchronized, and 72 BPM does that. What is evident in the early heart math literature, which is now secret, the business secret, and I haven't made any business deal with them, it's in their inner balance application. What is evident is that when the heart goes into the circadian pulse, 72 BPM, there is a moment where it fluctuates to, I think it is 96.4 BPM. That's when the 8 Hertz peak appears and the golden proportion, and it's then back at 72 BPM. And this is how the sustained coherence is then maintained for. It was just a few seconds for changing the DNA samples, but one trains through biofeedback to be able to sustain it for 20 minutes or even hours. Which is what pilots are doing, and they have objective parameters therein. Of course, it's the shape of the geometry of the macro body of the universe. Here is the 3 different samples that were changed at the same time by one pilot using his consciousness intent with coherence to change the DNA sample. So it would uncoil, it would coil more, and there would be a change in the middle. Some of these were done half a mile distance from the actual sample, and this wasn't even human DNA, this was animal DNA. It's not just 8 Hertz that does that, because 8 Hertz by itself was demonstrated over 2 years by Dr. Andrea Puharich to cure over 27 different organic diseases in triple-blind studies. But 8 cycles utilized in compassionate biological coherence with clear intent, which we call anthropic satience, is what produces the result. So it's the consciousness of 8 Hertz on a macro level that is compassionately embodied, that is of quintessence here in this discovery. And it's therefore a non-electromagnetic force that has been repeatedly observed by the HeartMath scientists. Old 1994 top-down view of DNA showing some of the every 36 degrees, you have a sugar phosphate pentagon. So for a double helix, 36 to 36 degrees for the base pair, that is at 72 degrees. It's a golden triangle. So here we have a picture of pinoline, which has a nuclear magnetic resonance of 8 cycles per second, and which is produced in the pineal gland at equal amounts to melatonin when the eyes are closed, and the pineal gland is right in the middle of the 2 great hemispheres, which synchronize the hemispheres are synchronized over the corpus callosum at 8 cycles per second. And here you see the sugar phosphate pentagons, which themselves are composed out of skeletons of the golden proportion. So the DNA curves 72 degree per base pair, the golden proportion. So that the DNA architecture is this transcendental gold. The microtubules, and also if you take a golden triangle of 72 degrees here, and you put in 7 of those fractally, it takes 7 of those to produce a golden spiral. Those are like the 7 planes, which we experience in the circle tunnel of transcendence or moving beyond.
Okay, interesting.
But not getting caught in any one of the triangular points. And of course, these qualities of the Vedas, the gunas, where you have the constructive sattvas, positive, tamas, destructive, and the rajas governing. And they must be a balance of trinity. If you get caught in positive, you must have the negative and then the ruler. And this is then the contraption. So this is a fluid system, and in the work of Dr. Johansson, he took the fact that I'll come to that in a moment. He took the fact that the binomial sequence, the Sierpinski sequence, where the binomial sequence is how we hear each other's voices. The binomial sequence is like 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 3, 3, 1. If you take these rows, you get 1, 2, and summarize them, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. This is the sequence that 8 Hertz sets up. 8 Hertz was observed by Puharich to also set up 4 Hertz and 2 Hertz and 1 Hertz signatures, as well as 16 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, and higher binomial resonances. So the binomial triangle itself, you can extract the Fibonacci numbers from. It was this particular factor which we published in the All-One Hadron material. I think especially the second edition that is now not on akasha.de anymore because it was hacked after the Project Camelot interview, but is on the mirrored site aton432hertz.info, the longer All-One Hadron material kind of book, where you see the binomial triangle extracting to the Fibonacci sequence. This was one of the components that was used by Johansen in his generation to 512 dimensions of all numbers exactly and completely. We can say there is a universal heart. It's also the heart of all of our bodies. It's all the 92% hydrogen atoms. 8 hertz is non-local and at the same time local. It induces the golden proportion. So 8 hertz is 90% of the universe. In every cubic centimeter, it sets up a resonance of the binomial sequence. It is the dielectric resonance of water, and the electromagnetic resonance of water is 8 hertz times 8 hertz times 8 hertz, or 512 hertz. The proportion that is set up is binomial, and it's been put onto a 12-tone music cone with a golden spiral. I have a whole series of animated slides on this, but the golden spiral, the golden 8 hertz proportion that is set up by 8 hertz is existing on a 12-tone music cone that is binomial. So these things are coexistent. Here is to look at the binomial triangle, which is called Meru Prastara in the Vedas. It's part of the Agnihotas. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, summation of the row numbers. Here is an animated understanding of the Fibonacci sequence drawn from the binomial equation. Now, and there is the Fibonacci extract. So in 1 mole of air, there is not one molecule interaction with another molecule interaction. There's at least 1,000 molecules interacting in a dynamic system. And scientists have then looked at that dynamic system, and that dynamic system is the binomial cascade. It's the binomial cascade, the flow of air molecules, which is actually a form of order, fractal self-embedded self-similarity that really is self-embedded again and again in whole octaves, that enables the so-called sound perception to occur. So the different wave angles of the flow of molecules then go into through the eardrums and the cochlear and the golden proportion, tickles the hairs, stimulating the 10th cranial nerve into electromagnetic dynamics, which then becomes the interpretation of sound in the computer aspect of the 5 senses, which are continuously being created. What we did then, to go back to your question on the 432,000 Manusa, was we took the work on in Puranas, where in the Puranas it describes 400,000 Manus, or humanoid species that are made by Manus, a hyperterrestrial intelligence. Hyperterrestrial intelligence is at least multiversal. Hyperterrestrial intelligence is able to edit the fabric of the universe through each of its dimensions and multiverses, and modulate its own self-similarities at any appropriate point there in reality synthesis, much like we do, but we're just doing that in a non-cognitive manner. The Manu of the Rig Veda are ascribed in the Anukramanas of the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda we came into when we were 32 years old. In our contacts as a teenager with the Emmanuels and the super civilizations, the Emmanuels were like the hyperterrestrials or the hyper civilizations. They described themselves as interuniversal. The experience, the percentage of a tiny percentage of their physical materialization was absolutely overwhelming to a 16-year-old. The living images in which they communicate are holding all other living images of myriad universes, and yet when you behold them and they're coming translated through one, it's like, how can you know this? How can one know this? And at the same time, you've always known it. That was a bit of the discordance at the beginning as I got familiar with the thing as a teenager. I've got 10,000 pages of this material, and they call themselves like Salvana and Manu, and so these terms were there. It was Silvana Emanuel in 1992, one of the last kind of transliterated communications, because these are not voices in the head. This is really spheres of understanding that unfold through the core ontological self through a 5-sensory fusion. The 5 senses are fused, very much like high-dose 5-MeO-DMT. And that unfolds then into the semantic representations with all those synesthesias going on in the syntax. So the last kind of syntax unfoldment, somatic syntax unfoldment, Salvana said, look at the somas of Harmeline and DMT involved in your translation experience 1989 in Denmark, where I was not there for people who walked in the room. I used to say it was like a 4-dimensional translation experience. As I said last time, I had no idea what it is. How I was in a state of having at least 4 arms. I was young and old, but yet there was still something beyond, much beyond, which was guiding it. And so I started looking at the research literature. There was no internet in 1992. And I found, going through secondhand libraries in Amsterdam and also in Copenhagen, a research by Bo Holmstad at the Karolinska Institute, Sweden, where they had taken yogis who had been meditating for at least 5 years in caves or dark rooms, and did blood assays and found that they had kind of mutated to beta-carboline systems. And the beta-carboline systems are related to harmaline. There's 10-methoxyharmaline and other beta-carbolines, tetrahydro-beta-carbolines. And the serotonin systems had given way to beta-carboline systems. Then came the research on phenyline, 6-methoxy-tetrahydro-beta-carboline, also by J. Scalloway at the University of Kuopio in Finland, with dreams. Of course, there is loterine, which is harmalan, which is in 5 different lotus plants, which is part of the whole lotus traditions and why the petals of the chakras are lotuses. And there's the lotus posture, is all part of an ancient martial arts sacred dance based on loterine inebriation, the lotus aspect of the soma plants, and so forth and so on. And so I started to develop my neurotransmitter theory when I was 22, 1992, with a pineal gland, where the endogenous beta-carbolines would enable the DMTs to become active. And I immediately engaged the darkroom, and within a year I brought some people through and started getting some interesting results. It was just that 5-MeO-DMT, the one that appeared first. First you get what you're having now, the Rue-like experience, phenyline, harmaline, appearing on the 3rd, 4th day from oversaturation of melatonin. And then as it reaches 350 milligrams, you start getting this, the 5-MeO-DMT at maybe 3 to 5 milligrams, certainly at 3 milligrams, where you start becoming the whole spine, and then you start seeing this moonlight. And with this moonlight, 5-MeO-DMT type light, you exteriorize the imagination. And that becomes quite prevalent over the next days. And it's really on the 8th day, a series of excuse me, a series of techniques, breathing techniques, other things are utilized, and DMT kicks in to a certain percentage of pilots. Not all pilots got DMT. There was also one woman, Margaret Hoffman, who was our organizer from Germany, who had nothing whatsoever. So we call this Margaret Hoffman syndrome. She also went to Brazil and drank a lot of different types of ayahuasca. They didn't work. And I think she also didn't have dreams. So there are some people who don't have dreams, some people who don't, DMT is not active, and that seems to be the case also in the dark room. When I was 32 then, I started looking at the Rig Veda, and actually looking at the Rig Veda and discovering from the various versions I had that the information I received from the manuals is pretty much the cosmology of the Rig Veda. Furthermore, I looked at the Anachrononis, which is the indexes, or showing who the authors are of each of the hymns of the Rig Veda, which are non-human sources all of the time. In the 9th book of the Rig Veda, there are 3 hymns which are given to Salvana, later called Savarna. The Salavahanas, they're actually called, and they appear as late on as the Indus Valley Kings. They are also called that as water bearers in the Harappa culture, and then the earlier Sarasvati River Valley culture, which goes back at least 14,000 years. There are older remnants of that. And these were 3 hymns on soma. So that Salvana, to a 22-year-old, said, look at the somas of Harmeline and DMT being involved in the translation experience, then kind of set the stage for what I would discover at 32. Around that time, I also found then the Buddhistic Sutra of the Golden Light, which is where Gautama Buddha is transmitting to Ananda, his cousin, where he talks about Jalavana. Now, Jalavana is also called water bearer, but it's just a J instead of an S. And he is giving all universal medicines to all the universal worlds to cure the psyche and the body from suffering and to bring cognition. Identical concepts to hymn 97 of Book 10 of the Rig Veda on Soma, the 108 Soma plants, or the 107 goddess plants with King Soma, Soma Raja is the 108th, where these are brought in by Brahmanaspati from before or beyond the universe as principles that were implanted as plants with the qualities of the whole universe to enable the sleeping human being, visa ignorance, cognitive ignorance or poison, to have a conjugation, a medicinal conjugation, and become whole, Purusa. Again, the Purusa is described in the Rig Veda as being the summation of all personal and impersonal moments, past, present, and future, as well as being 3/4 being beyond this universe, as the cosmic persona, which is both animate and inanimate, and which is then also the foundation of the Manava. The Purusa, cosmic Godhead, is also called Manava. The idea of Godhead or cosmic persona is there is the ineffable all as God of all oneness, which is described as Visvakarmanu in I think hymn 80 and hymn 81 of Book 10 of the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda, which is the oldest manuscript of mankind, and portions pictographically are at Nirgara, Kalibangan, Lothal, other Sarasvati archaeological sites as pictures. When I was at Rajasthan at Kalibangan, in the museum there, and there's about 1 tourist per year who goes to that museum, 50 pictograms were shown of the Sarasvati language with the 50 Sanskrit letters. We weren't allowed to take pictures, but we had the camera running, so we got it. That's secret information only for the academic Brahmins. So the Sarasvati pictographic script to Sanskrit is already known. We've captured it. The Purusa is described as a sphinx, a manticore, the source of all life, is a unicorn that at the same time from that unicorn you can extract a yogi, a cobra, an elephant, a tiger, all these different animals. So it's a template of life. In the Purusa beast, you also have the body of light man transducing through that sphinx into a biological man or into cognitive sleep. The plant medicines are then used to produce an 8 Hertz conjugation and RNA intercalation through the DMTs, which are, the tryptamines are in a high majority of the 108 plants. Like Saltaro is Desmodium giganticum, which contains DMT, or the Kusha grasses of the Rig Veda, the sacred grasses of Durga Ma and the sacred grasses of the gods, upon which the gods in Soma visions appear. The Kusha grasses are Phalaris arundinacea, the highest source material of DMT.
I have it.
And 5 million.
I have it. It's going out here.
So you need to process that very, very specifically to get rid of the gramine. And we've done that. There is a way to do that. We've used it quite profusely in the time of our research with it, and it works without the gramine stammers. That's another story. So the Kusha grasses are very, very central in that. There is the acacia tree, which is called the Sindhu, and which was distributed by the Indus Valley to the Egyptians, where it becomes Sint, the D becoming a T, and to the Sumerians, it's the tree of life, and it's the Cassia Madani, which contains DMT, 5-mure DMT, and some beta-carbolines. So all of these are part of what became known as medicine Buddhism. In the Jalavana story, some of these 108 plants are described, and that waters of life are made from them to heal the psyche and the body. Nagarjuna, the 11th Buddhistic patriarch, who is the rock star for the mantra Mani Padme Hum, so everyone will know that #1 hit. Mani Padme Hum is the rock star hit of Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna was allegedly the first Buddhistic patriarch that was able to take his body with him. He did the Rasa Ratnakara. The Rasa tradition comes from the Rasana, Soma Rasana tradition, the extracts of the Rig Veda on Soma alchemy and transformation. This is more than just ayahuasca and psychedelics. This is hadronic macromolecular systems involving, including psychedelics, but brought into a macro resonance system that also involves metals, because electrum was found at Lothal, Kalibangan in Rajasthan. Electrum was first manufactured by the Saraswati River Valley culture. This is thousands of years before Sumeria or the Elamites. And the byproduct of electrum, which is bringing together gold and silver with meteoric crystal, is orbitally rearranged monatomic elements, usually weighing only 44% of 56% of their mass. 44% is missing by weight. Is in a Cooper paired state, is superconducting. And if you boil down cow brain, as David Hudson did, and other researchers, sheep brain, you get first some carbon and silicon, etc. And you put that through a DC arc. Usually the DC arc of electricity is only a few seconds, but at about 70 seconds, this white stuff starts coming out, and a bit longer, different types of white stuff, which is the platinum group elements, in an orbitally rearranged monatomic state. Nuclear deformed. The deformation is only deformed to our 3D sensorial observation. The deformation is actually iso geometry, exactly, and we've modeled that with some of the platinum group elements using iso dodecahedron. So this is the source of life. The thing is with a superconductor is that nothing passes through a superconductor. The researchers would heat the superconducting platinum group elements in a high Meissner spin state, and at a certain level it disappears. And it's also on the camera, it's not visible. They would steer the pan and then introduce cooling agents. And when it's all cooled down, the elements reappear, but they haven't moved according to the steering. So the steering happened around their high spin state. And this is throughout our bodies. 8 Hertz was found by Dr. Puharich to pass straight through a superconductor. And that's interesting. So 8 Hertz in the brain goes immediately to the pineal gland in between the brain hemispheres. The synchronization frequency is 8 Hertz, producing an 8 Hertz nuclear magnetic resonance molecule called pinoline. And relatives like harmalan, which has in the nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy charts from the 80s that I utilized in the Soma conspiracy, harmalan is roughly around 8 Hertz too, maybe a bit plus, a bit minus on either side. This produces rapid eye movement. We produce this endogenously every night when we sleep. So, and this is also in the Soma Raja plant, the wild rue. The wild rue of Saint Van Bingen, Hildegard van Bingen. Her main medicine was rue, and so she sang a song of rue, which gave her piano vision, and it was through rue she could communicate with all the plants, medicinal plants, and made her whole medicinal system. She was a medicine woman, a bona fide sage, using rue. So this is part of our tradition. It's part of the Christ the Shaman. We've done a great deal of work on the Bible, showing that rue is part of the Bible. Those who translated the Bible from Aramaic into Greek, Pliny the Elder, gives in his 40 volumes of natural history all of the plant code bases of the complete New Testament. So it's a complete shamanic manual that's been apparently plagiarized from the Rig Veda. The sayings of Jesus have been demonstrated to be the sayings of Buddha. The work of researchers Dr. Elmer at the University of Freiburg, comparing the Sutras of Buddha and the Digya Nikaya to the Synoptic Gospels, shows paragraph by paragraph that they are the same semantic genetic material with the same sayings. I don't necessarily believe that Buddha existed per se either. He's supposed to be an emanation of Vishnu, and he has a cousin called Ananda. Vishnu was originally Purusa, and Purusa lays down on Ananta, which is a form of Ananda, which is the omni serpent, a reflection of the Purusa, which is infinite bliss with infinite serpent heads. and dreams this universe. What we do find is the sayings of Jesus and the Buddha in the Rig Veda. For instance, let those who have eyes to see, let them see, and those who have ears to hear, let them hear. Praise be to Soma, is what follows.
Is that in the Rig Veda?
That's in the Rig Veda. So you've got the parables of Jesus going to the Rig Veda. Now, the idea of Isa Christi is also Rig Vedic. I've got the Monsieur Williams hard copy dictionaries of the Rig Veda. Isa is a form of Isana, the breath of the cosmic Godhead. And Christi, or Christi Nam means name, the name that is Christi, it's the cosmic people who breathe, the Isa. So Isa Christi is the cosmic people that breathe the Godhead, the super and hyper civilizations, so to speak. So that is actually a root associated to the Rig Veda. And the Purusa feast is also celebrated from the 20th of December to the 25th. It's also when Krishna is celebrated to be born on the 25th of December, so it's Merry Krishna, who has an epithet, who also has the epithet Krista, and Indra and Agni has Christi Nam as bynames or epithet as well. Indra is particularly interesting in the Rig Veda. Indra is the main god of the Rig Veda. He's a human who becomes a shaman, who becomes one with the cosmic Godhead through Soma, and with his partner Indrani, as head of the Marutas, who become able to travel through all the 49 realms of the 7 lokas and the 7 talas, a whole other story, which we're going to be going into with great detail in slideshow work in the next few weeks. The 432,000 Manus, as the Manu are hyper civilizations, part of the Manava, or the spine of the cosmic persona. We are each described to have a unity self that is not higher self or lower self, but it's a summation of all the different selves. And it's called an atom self, or Ati Manu. Later called Atma, very different concept. An atom self, an Ati Manu. Ati means the utmost sphere, comprises then molecules of Ati Manus, and the molecular Ati Manus of many, many supercells are in a past, present, and future configuration. And those then build up cells within the 7 alpha and omega Manus. And it is the 4th alpha Manu that is described briefly in the Rig Veda, and then thousands of years later, more in science fiction linear form in Puranas, Manu Vivasvata, the kind of Noah of the Vedas. He has a massive ship, many thousands of times bigger than planet Earth in the proportions given, that comes out of the snail constellation called Antarmirda, obviously the root of Andromeda, anchors to Kasyapa, which is the Vedic root of Cassiopeia. Kasyapa is a divine sage, a reflex of the Manu. He's also someone on Earth who founded atomic physics thousands of years ago. He's also one of the authors of the Rig Veda, so there are always these different facets. The ship of Manu is described to have the 7 reflexes of the 7 rishis or sages, which are doing sound, light, syllable work, which are then emanated out from the ship into many different galactic systems, including our Milky Way, or Gala, Axi. Gala is milk, Axi, the eye that is seeing in Sanskrit. The Sea of Milk, as it's also called, and passes through what are shown as roos, or fish eyes, in the Sarasvati Valley cylinder seals, which has the value of 1 and 0. And these fish eyes then emanate out, they're called roos, that's the name of it, roo, without an E, but it's funny parallel, comes across all the time. Ru in guru, ru means medicine. And then there are different interpretations about gu for some medicine.
Wow, that's funny. That's funny.
Yeah, Bhoganata is one of those who points that out. Bhoganata is supposed to have lived for thousands of years. He was the student of Agastya, one of the writers of the Rig Veda, and the creator of Tamil, and the one who made the Rasa or Rasana text on Soma alchemy, which becomes Rasayana under Bhoganata. and that becomes eventually Rasaratnakara by Nagarjuna, and that becomes medicine Buddhism, which leads to all the medicine traditions, including conventional medicine today, meaning to heal the body and soul of animals and humans, and alleviate suffering, and bring in the Manu Si, which is the full embodied Buddha. So Buddhism in that sense is a resurrection of the Manu understanding. The Manu Vivasvata in the story, briefly mentioned as the Noah of the Rig Veda, and given in more detail in the fifth literature of the Vedas, the Puranas, thousands of years later, reflects itself and emanates then these life forms, 10,800,000 forms of life, and 432,000 Manusa, man-like species, which are given to different galactic systems. We've shown the logistics of that in our 432,000 Manusa chapter, which is available online from the Manu, to the 432,000 syllables of the Rig Veda. Now, the 432,000 syllables of the Rig Veda in an uncompressed state, in a presently compressed state, Dr. Sabash Kak, in the astronomical code of the Rig Veda, Los Alamos National Laboratory scientist and Indian, has demonstrated the compressed Rig Veda follows the cycles of the planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, etc. perfectly. So prose of the Rig Veda is an astronomical code, which is itself extraordinary. It's a compressed form.
It's so wild.
So that's the outer vehicle. When you decompress, things like prana is parana. So when you decompress the seed words at the correct positions of the strophe, you get 432,000 syllables. And Satapatha Pramana proclaims to still know that secret. We've identified portions of that. So 432,000 syllables were given in tantric literature to be related to different aspects of the body system. This was updated by Maharishi in the 70s because there was more data on the spinal cord. So the spinal cord with its rexed, if you take all of those components, multiply them to the motor neurons in the center of the brain, you have 432,000 exactly, based on the number of inside in the spinal cord. We have slides we could show on that. The average number of dopamine neurons, the motor neurons, are between 400,000 and 500,000. But if you take the spinal cord and the rexed, you get exactly 452,000. So Maharishi kind of updated that exactly to the 432,000 syllables, which could then, through the spinal cord, be attributed to exact body functions, which before had been approximated, but pretty similar. So it implies those who wrote the Rig Veda understood that the Rig Veda is the body, or is the technology of the body, as well as being the universe. Rig is a branch, Veda wisdom, a branch of wisdom of the living tree of life. So the 432,000, the 400,000 Manusa in the Puranas, which we logistically demonstrated are related to the 432,000 syllables of the Rig Veda, because there in the Puranas you have 400,000 syllables, which are divided by 40 to give the number of verses. The Rig Veda, it's the same. The Rig Veda's 432,000 syllables are divided by 40. This is the number 40 is Viraj. Viraj is the female reflex of Purusa. From Purusa, Viraj is made, and from Viraj, Purusa is made. And the Viraj meter has 10 syllables, 4 times 10 or 40 syllables. So when you divide the 432,000 syllables by 40, you get the 10,800 verses of the Rig Veda. So those are cross-associated. And so we did that with that transparency work and transliterated. Transliterated the Rig Vedic hyperlogic, because it's always hyperlogic, to the more linear science fiction logic of the Puranas. Putting those together, and we'll give many examples, the 432,000 human-like species are also represented in the 432,000 motor neurons, or the 432,000 different physiological functions of the body, by which we're continuously producing our 5 sensorial reality or hallucination.
I mean, that means we are on a massive psychedelic trip right now without even taking any plants.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
I mean,
Well, we are taking substance. I mean, our whole body is a continuum of substances with 512 dimensional complexity of calculation.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is so mind blowing. This information. So, who wrote the Rig Veda? Who was writing the Rig Veda?
We've dealt with a lot in this interview. We also started with Pindar, which showed, we gave a little glimmer of how the different languages appear to be consistent to 1986 Oxford English and how it's arranged and how word strings can be made from the Franklin Spellmaster QE model from 1986 and all the anagrams that they will fold up perfectly following a logistical system, which would indicate everything is artificial. What the Rig Veda itself says is, I mean, it's proclaimed in the structure of the Rig Veda. There's multiple levels. It's got a number system. Obviously, all the Sanskrit letters are together. Take, for instance, the first hymn of the Rig Veda. It's based on Gayatri. There are 7 main meters that are predominantly used. The first of which is Gayatri, and Gayatri is 8 syllables by 8 syllables by 8 syllables, not the later 6 syllables, 6 syllables, 6 syllables, 6 syllables, which is what the Brahmins and Hindus later used. It's the 888. 8 plus 8 plus 8 is 24. 4 times 3 times 2 is also 24. So the Gayatri meter has 8 syllables at the heart. It's the 3 fires of Agni at life, and the head is the 3 fires of consciousness, of feeling, of life as one, the 3 Agni fires. The heart meter, Bharati, is 36 syllables. The 7th meter, Jagati, is 48 syllables. The 5th meter, it's Virat, which is 40 syllables. However, overall, the whole structure of the Rig Veda has about 90 different meters. And there are 16 intermediary metric systems. Now, the metric systems is you've got all the Sanskrit letters together. How do you find the strophe? How do you find the punctuation? Where do you extract the word? And this is where you need to know the metric Chandra. So when it's said that it's laid out by Gayatri, you need to go 8, 8 to 8. The way that the first hymn is laid out is you get 8 by 8, then a divider for the strophe and another 8. That is followed by another 8 rows of this 8-16 system. That is genetic prose exactly, because you know in the double helix you have 8 nucleotides, 16 base pairs. So this is genetic prose, and that the DNA then to make up a story follows another 8 of those 8 or 8-16. So we modeled that in quite considerable detail. We felt quite confident in doing that and guided in doing that, because we anyway discovered that some of our teachers of the Emmanuels and Anus are named and as authors or portions of the Rig Veda. And because of other research, like research on the I Ching by Dr. Martin Schoenberger, who demonstrated that the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching do follow the 64 codons of the DNA, and even the trigrams follow the way that amino acids code through, you know, in the base pair letters, only 3 amino acid code. 1 is always left empty. So the trigrams exactly follow the patterns of amino acids in the hexagrams according to the 64 codons. It's very well established. Multiple scientists have repeated that, pretty convinced. The I Ching is believed to have come from Bo Yang, which is a kind of a permutation or emanation of Bhaganatha. Bhaganatha, a student of Agastya, one of the authors of the Rig Veda, and who created the first academies like Nalanda. Nalanda was a massive Oxford or Cambridge, where the study was alchemy, soma, yogi, shamanism, and involving this whole system, this proto-Vedic living system of experience, cybernetic system. The authors that are given in the Anukramanas are many. We've got the Deva Akasha, which there are 33. The space gods, that is, Deva Akasa. Akasa is mediating space. Deva is the form of gods. There have been 1. as Devakasa, one word, but they are 33. They're obviously ascribed to the 33 divisions of the spine, 32 plus the skull. Also, the Purusa Sukta, the one hymn of the Rig Veda on the Purusa, is 32 lines. Purusa is the 33rd. Everyone is the 33rd degree. That's the ontological observer first. So the author of the Rig Veda is, in that sense, what is known as Anthropos, or cosmic Godhead. That's also our existential foundation of being, our actual observer that cannot be reduced. So we can draw examples, give semantic details, poetry, make animations to get glimmerings of remembering and cognition, and then also bring in protocols, suggestive protocols that might be useful to engage a unification of the opposites in oneself and the living library of oneself.
Wow. Wow. Okay, I mean, I could go on and on and on for hours, but do you have any questions that's burning in your heart right now?
No. No. I have no questions.
Yet again, he's having smoke coming out of his ears.
Holy smoke. Okay.
You've answered everything about UFOs we wanted to know.
UFOs, well, yeah, okay. So the Manusa, that's right. Your question was about, the hyper-civilizations. A lot of the Manusa in this model, 3/4 are sleeping like we are. So about 108,000 are in superconsciousness, Atimanu. Superconsciousness is the 4 bandwidths of consciousness united as an indivisible fourth. So you start with alpha, you unify theta, you unify delta, and beta as 4 spectrums. We have dreams in theta, deep wave sleep in delta. We have the foundation with alpha, and then with beta we have the intellectual waking life. All of those must be unified so that the unconscious, subconscious, and conscious together as one whole. 8 hertz enables that, and that's of course so much the magnetic resonance of 8 hertz. So because the Purusa is described to go beyond this universe by 3/4, as the Purusa was obviously in having fourths, but only 1/2 was 1/4 was divided from 3/4, 3/4 being the omniverse. Everything that remains of the Purusa is everything that is animate and inanimate, past, present, and future. This is then also reflected in the way that the Manu diagrams as macro composites within the dream and awakening dream manifest the 402 Manusa, which it would be the computer system also of our biology, of our sensorial reality. It would be the whole game itself. So 324,000 of these Manusa are in cognitive Kansas, in cognitive dissonance, in cognitive sleep, like we are, having a division, maybe being beta, sometimes alpha, sometimes theta. And in the new cycle, the awakening dream, more of these 4 bandwidths are occurring at the same time. A full Atimanu is described as 432,000 nodes of space and time. The physical body, we have whole slides on this, has 7 levels going from marrow to skin. The physical body in the Vedic and Rig Vedic system has 72,000 nodes of space and 72,000 nodes of time, which are related to the lymph nodes, blood capillaries, and nerve nodes. So 144,000 nodes. Then the imaginary or virtual body of the imagination, the subtle body, the midway body, Astaraka, has, again, 144,000 nodes of space and time, which are imaginary or psychic nerves. And then the causal sphere, which goes from faster than light to infinite speed, which is just the 7 manas. It's pure consciousness observing itself, like high state LSD, where the observer is observing itself. In this sphere, you have then 144,000 nodes of space and time that are causal, from superluminal to infinite speed. These 3 times 144,000 make the 432,000 nodes of space and time. That is the Atimanu light body or rainbow body representation. That is, unity self is all of that in summation. The 7 bodies would appear to be the spectrum of that. And then the Atimano 432,000 nodes of space and time is the via media. It's the architecture that is both at the same time. So that is superconsciousness. And 108,000 of those civilizations have either maintained or are in that superconsciousness, which means they're also past, present, and future time traveling. But they're blending over, joining that one quarter to the three quarters. And so this is the awakening in man. And that's why disclosure is not just about ETs, it's about our very nature. It's about what builds our somatic system moment by moment. 432,000 body functions, 432,000 motor neurons that we're continuously hallucinating our five sensorial reality through, requiring 512 dimensions in a second. It can be directly hacked by compassionate haters, love interactively. And the foundation of our ontological observer can interact with it. And so these other civilizations are also joining in that. It must be as within, so without. Our understanding has been that whilst there are macro interpersonal civilizations of our micro universe, these are all real civilizations as well. Since the complete human DNA, we have about 2% coding. The junk DNA contains animals, plants, every animal and plant. When you activate the rest of the DNA and link it isotopically or hypertopically to the human DNA, the full humanoid spectrum will be present. The final realization will be a hyperhologram. This will be a hadronic hypergenetic realization where the dead DNA as we understand it today, which doesn't really apply to core DNA, but only to unwinding DNA. The core DNA, hypergenetic material, which is past, present, and future, requires 512 dimensions. When realized in holographic form, hyperhologram, hypertopic hologram, every aspect of humanity related to every other species will be that hyperhologram. When that hyperhologram would be spin trapped, let's say by a unified field overall vehicle, by phase conjugating or cyclotronic resonance systems, which might not be exactly coherent, or ISCAT-like system, incoherent scattered radar, then there can be spin trapping of the hyperhologram, which produces capsules, space-time machine capsules, with temporary or more permanent humanoid forms. Those humanoid forms, whatever they're experiencing in their own individual universal space-time cells that may be, let's say, more feline or maybe more plant, are axiomatically indexed to all of the motor neurons through the Rexed for our magic reality. So this is a kind of a awakening dream for myriads of worlds. Those are worlds within and worlds without, so that an omnijective continuum emerges. And music is one of the key. It's at 8 hertz is the tone C, 432 hertz the A, for 512 hertz the electromagnetic absorption of water, produces synchronicity through the plasticity of the brain in scientific studies, so ameliorating a whole host of psychiatric disorders. And synchronization of brain hemispheres is 8 hertz. So they're very, very key components.
Could we try to drop all the science and Vedas and all these things and try to go, because I'm really curious to hear, with your knowledge, what kind of water do you drink, like, for example, and also do you have an advice on just one single spiritual practice, maybe some meditation, or maybe something that you would just tell people that this would potentially be a good idea to do on a daily basis?
Well, we talked about the 8 hertz, 8 hertz, 8 hertz. So the practice of feelings of compassion, whether you buy in balance or not. I mean, it's a little thing you put on your ear. You download the app on your Android or iPhone or iPad, etc. And then you do a certain breathing rate with it, and then you see what the compassionate coherence is. You see it goes into the green. You'll also say, oh, me producing so much coherence, so much compassion. No, that's not possible. And down you drop out of coherence. So you can edit out your own dreamer maintaining aspects.
So basically what you're saying is that there is an app that is measuring on your ear? Or what?
There's an app called Inner Balance from Heart Math Institute, and then there's a little earplug that you put into your thunderbolts of your iPad. And it measures the heart rate. And so all the research they did in the 90s with 8 hertz, it's secret now, is part of that application. And so the golden proportion, the 8 hertz, that aspect is now called basically just coherence. And coherence levels show into the high green. So that's biofeedback. Actually, you do that for a few times in different states and have an objective feedback to what compassionate coherence is. That can be enough for a person. Some people then want to sustain that for a few minutes, 20 minutes, even longer periods of time, which in the research studies it produces very good effects. It decreases cortisol, increases DHEA to a level that's applicable for a normal level.
Okay.
But then, so that's one aspect, the heart at compassion. The sound A activates the heart. It tickles at the thymus. That's generally how it's expressed.
The sound A.
And that's the first one of the 3 ecstatic sounds of ooh. So
yeah. Now I got it. Yeah. Okay.
The primordial A is the foundation where it begins. The tantrics then later corrupted that. The base is at the spine, but actually. Bhoganata says it's the primordial root, which is the 8-folded Surya yantra, which is rooted to the heart. Primordial A. The ooh goes down to the prostrate uterus. So when a woman is gently contracting on a uterus or on our prostrates or on the scrotum, gentle contractions, the EEG shows 8 hertz. So that way we're having the reference of the compassion in the heart at 8 hertz. We do some contractions with the breath. So one does deep breaths, in breath, mid breath, holding, out breath, surrendering. We kind of take the unity self. We're breathing in the acceptance of the unity self. The breath is a horse. Consciousness harnesses the horse. We begin with the heart. We unify all 8 poles of the heart, making the heart into nostrils so that you're tickling in the unity self and switching on the cellular network into golden, smiling, unified field, tickle from the harnessed compassion. And then with that, focusing on the uterus prostrate and the whole regions of life, using the electrical sockets of the ovaries and the testicles, that's tickling hadronic force. So the nuclear aspect of 8 hertz and anchoring that. And for engaging 8 hertz in the mind, the way that light comes into the fovea of the eyes, it has to communicate over the corpus callosum. And when you mirror the testicles or ovaries to your eyeballs, for a man, the ovaries are the eyeball, for a woman, it's the testicles, but you create a mirror symmetry so that they tickle. And you begin with a floating point. That means at the tip of your nose, and you close your eyes, you find yourself in a place really that's beyond the brain. Although it's related to the midbrain and the cave of Brahma and 6 main brain organs, it's a floating, disembodied eye, which is called Itza in the Mayan system. It's shown quite prolifically related to Ololioki and other entheogenic plants. So it's important to have the floating point. That's the ontological existential being, which is also the intent that engages the heart breath and then engages the life force. And then when the eyes are tickling, they smile to each other, look up and in, kiss at the brow. There's a feather that is tickling the brow, and you click to the rare anterior amygdala, where bliss is the interpretation of all somatic sensations, whereas the normal default is the front of the amygdala, where it's stress, daily life stress packets. So the tickling of the amygdala back, the eyes up and in, because the light cones then are crossing across the brain hemispheres as the 2 eyes are synchronizing, that produces an 8 hertz signal by looking up and in. We produce brain orgasm. You can take a piece of really dark chocolate in this practice with breath and unifying this, and lick the chocolate on the roof of the mouth. Of course, one also connects the lower aspects through the meridians of the tongue. The tongue is the thymus gland. So you can connect that to the amygdala at the front, or at the back to the pituitary, hypothalamus, pineal systems, and the middle. You can also link the middle by putting the tongue tip behind the lower teeth and the middle of the tongue meridians on the roof of the mouth. This connects the electricity. Of course, you will find yourself being guided with a cranial movement as you have a sacral movement harnessed to your breath. And then when you have this full tickle in the eyes and this smile and making love with each other, you pull the eyes back into your head and you use the trinitized finger position, which is not peace. You put a middle way in there at the position of the eyes, and you feel an 8 hertz synchronization between them, going to the pineal gland, which is, so if you go to the tip of the ears into the middle of the head, that's the pineal gland, and you're pulling the eyes back across the spark gap of the pineal gland, and there you get your brain orgasm. Brain orgasm is very satisfying, and it's instead of an ascending force, it's a descending force, and that can be mixed with our energy. We then engage the unification of the 7 brain chakras, each of which we've developed from the 7 manas of the Vedas, the 7 circuits of Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson into significant greater detail, into the 8 polar opposites. So to unify the mind as an 8 hertz sphere, the heart is an 8 hertz sphere, and life is an 8 hertz sphere. In the practice, we make an ISO 8 hertz unit of the heart. So the base chakra of the heart is the sternum, and the manubrium is the crown, and of course the heart of the heart is the middle. And so we have 8 positions that are unified, which then go into an ISO unit that is unified into an 8 hertz ISO unit lens, or a UFO shape, which then goes head over heels into the sphere, or the ISO hypersphere.
You got your UFO.
Because I think that the core of the DNA is, as hypergenetic material, is basically it's our unified field object. So we have the UFO card.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's interesting. In my meditations, I'm finding with the tip of my tongue and the roof of my mouth, it's very sensitive. It's orgasmic. It's very, even right now, I can feel it.
Yeah,
it's very interesting. Yeah. And so, this thing with the brain orgasm, I've had my own little experiences with that.
Yes. Oh. Yeah, the idea, of course, is to create the hypergasm or a link to the omnigasm, because the foundation, the hypertopic plane is an infinite penis and an eternal vagina, and we're the children between them. So since the orgasmic force is related to the hadronic fifth force, is an attractor force that enables fusion of the electrons into the heart of the atom, maintain the whole body orgasm, in that sense, ecstasis, is like electrolysis of the water tetrahedron, which can then produce, these new proteins, the 72 hours maintain coherence.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. We got bombarded with gifts here, and for all the listeners who feel that this maybe went too fast, do what I do. Watch this again and again and again, and then press play and pause and research what was said, like the words you don't understand, and then press play again and pause. And so take it bit by bit and just go slowly ahead, because sometimes, Ananda has been in this game his whole life, and for me, I've been researching a lot of these things myself for many years, so I kind of get a good part of what you're talking about. But what I did when I first got in contact with your information is I just sat down, like, methodically. I started Googling the words, and I started trying, like, every time you mentioned hadronic mechanics, and I was like, so I went into the internet and I tried to find out what is that really, what you're talking about, and just get some general understandings of the things I mentioned here, and create this whole big picture, and you will see how the whole thing fits in together. It's all connected, it's all related, and this is what is so trippy about it.
Yeah.
Because we're going to start realizing that who are we really, and what is, I mean, who are we really, and where are we really? Like, it's, I mean, there's so many mysteries to life, and I feel you're giving a very good version of explanation of what's going on. So definitely
suggestions, they're works of art, the works of art. But as you saw at the beginning, if we would also begin, like, I would prepare very specific slideshows on a particular theme. I think within the first hour of me talking, I can still remain to some degree linear, especially if it's a theme that we're following slides. On a theme. So that's another thing you can really develop as well. Would help these kind of like hyperspheres have also a valley of reference.
Yes. I feel it's a symphony. This is a dance. It's a song. It's a play and display of consciousness. It's a movement of life, and I'm so excited about this. I mean, I can't think of anyone more interesting to interview than you. I mean, I think this is just really. This is really.
Flanagan was pretty interesting. You have quite a few interesting people, and you're bringing a consortium of great kindred spirits, and bring your own experience in. It's really, really important. It's a lifetime practice. I mean, you explained yesterday. You went through 5 different accentuations of karate, and then made your own style. And of course, this is a martial art. Is it because martial arts came as a sacred dance in Tibet? Which is the dance of the universe.
Yes, I learned these things through martial arts. I remember standing in the dojo, moving around, and I'm like, wait a minute, like, and suddenly I got a massive download just from a small movement, just one little movement, and I was just like, the whole thing opened up. And also, what I love about martial arts is you can't fake it, because when you stand in front of an opponent, if there's fear in you, if there's a story, if there's a projection, if there's anything going on, you are, in trouble in this fight, because you won't be able to be in flow and freedom. And so martial arts,
because generally it's about being faster than the flow itself.
Right. You have to. So you actually have to go into the rhythm and stay in the rhythm, and then make him feel safe in this rhythm. But then you break it, because you can step out of it and go in and break the rhythm. And that's how you go get ahead, And so there's so many elements about martial arts that I really love. I could talk for hours about that.
So you had your near-death experiences, and that, obviously that gave you the advantage, because there were all the black belt students, they were gone in one day. You knocked them down because you had this ontological observer, which is beyond any movement. Already, so that gave the advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. You go in a completely different state, and it does not matter what you do, it will work always, because you can feel everybody, and you can feel intentions. You're just part of the ocean. So, and if you merge into the creation and become fluid expression of what is, nothing can happen to you, not even in martial arts. So it's very beautiful.
Absolutely.
Okay, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you both. And great pleasure.
This has been very mind-jamming and definitely enlightening.
Jamming as in the jam of a donut, or jamming as in musical jamming, or traffic jam?
Well, to be honest, it's like a ibogaine trip without any ibogaine. It's just it's like, when you have like a really profound psychedelic trip, and you're like, wow, this thing that I just saw on the peak, I would never see again, but I'll try to remember the essence of it. It's just like translating it into English.
Exactly.
And I think it will take me a year to really get it all, but we will dissect it piece by piece.
All right. Okay. If that's possible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, for the first hour, you were linear, but then it becomes spherical, and that's when the linear mind just collapses.
Should we just so thank you everybody for listening, and see you.
Thanks guys. Okay. Wonderful.